I move we approve.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from our June 20th meeting. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor vote aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And we'll begin tonight with our public hearing items. Our first item is application Z16-7, which is filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting a review and amendment of Section 4269 of wireless communication facilities. So this is continued from our June 6th meeting, and we'll hear from staff.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to combine 3.1 and 3.2 in the same report. They have the same status. There was some changes in FCC regulations, and there were also some changes where the state legislature got involved in wireless communication facilities in a way that they had not before. And this was initiated in recognition of needing to make some changes to both our wireless communication facilities ordinance, which deals with facilities on private property, as well as the DAS systems that are in our public right-of-way. Regrettably, we are still needing to spend some time working with our legal counsel to get those into a form where we're ready for your have a true public hearing draft. So allowing for the time that they need, we're recommending that items 3.1 and 3.2 be continued to your September 5th Planning Commission meeting.
So
And I think that could be done in a single motion.
It's been moved to move 3.1 and 3.2 to our September 5th meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor vote aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So that would bring us to application 3.3 or Z17-5.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was initiated by the Planning Commission after a study session and several discussions, and kind of grew out a little bit from feedback received from the Planning Commission and City Commission about particularly the context of when a planned commercial zoning district should be applied for, and also the status of when a site plan, a final site plan, should be part of the equation, and whether that should be done initially at the initial application stage, or if it could be deferred if the use is unknown or if there's a need for additional detail. And so we submitted a draft to you at your June meeting, June 20th, and feedback we received was a desire from the development community to have additional time to review and digest the changes. Particularly the biggest substantive change was a recommendation or language that basically said there would be, in the context of rezoning, no more straight commercial zoning except for pre-existing commercial zone lots, and that moving forward that all applications for a commercial rezoning would be a planned process, which essentially mean that either the Planning Commission or City Commission would be reviewing and approving site plans for all commercial projects before building permits could be issued. What was intended to be primarily a procedural cleanup, cleaning up the process, making things more clear, resulted in that change, which was a major substantive change. We recognize the desire to have some more predictability or criteria as to when planned commercial districts are required or used. Requiring them in every instance, staff agrees, was an overreach on our part. And so what we hear from the Planning Commission and City Commission is, how can we incorporate the principles in the comprehensive plan and those concepts into new commercial development as it occurs. The development community has expressed a desire to have a process that is predictable, consistent, and timely. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive, but what we're primarily interested in discussing today is getting some feedback on that question, as also anything else that you have in your review of the draft in your packet that you might want to see clarified or addressed in the future. So one thing we wanted to just share with you, and I'm not sure on the order of these, John, so you're going to have to help me. We put in your packet, if you could go back to slides 1, 2, 3, and 4. By way of example, we put this in your packet in the question about site plans and site plan details, and this is just an example that we gave that when this project was proposed, the Planning Commission, City Commission felt that it was best addressed through a planned commercial district. There were other reasons for doing so, because in a planned commercial district, that is the only setting where the City of Salina can attach conditions to a zoning change. And in the past, conditions have included things like adding acceleration or deceleration lanes, or in the case of Lowe's or Walmart, that development pay for traffic signals that are created the need for by the development. In this case, Menards wanted to have a sign that was taller and larger than what standard zoning allowed, so that was one of the reasons for that being done as a planned district. But what you had here was a site plan that was approved as part of the zoning change for Menards, and then this development had additional lots, and so the approval of those site plans was deferred until there were known users for those lots. So John, if you could go to the next one. Can you go to slide 2? Or you've already done slide 2. So this, okay, so you can go to 3 or 4. So this is another example of a planned commercial district. The initial plan, the only known user was Lowe's, and there are 7 additional lots in this development, and this was done as a planned commercial district because it was in a impact street and gateway into the community. And so at the time of the zoning change, Lowe's was the only known and identified user, and then individual site plans have been approved for Holiday Inn Express, Dimeroo, for Rib Crib, and later for Salina Square. So those are examples of the planned commercial district being used with a deferred site plan. 2 drawings that we wanted to put up just for discussion purposes. John, if you could go to the PC zone properties map. So just for, and you're going to have to slide it up, John, because there's a heavy concentration to the south, but it is distributed throughout the community. One thing, if you look at this pattern, is that the planned commercial districts that we have in place to date have been done either on impact streets or gateways, such as Magnolia, I-135 interchange, the 9th and Schilling intersection, the South 9th Street corridor where there's an overlay district, and then what's identified as a neighborhood center at Schilling in Ohio. So this map depicts the areas in the community that are done as planned commercial districts instead of a straight commercial district. John, if you could go to the impact streets and gateways map. So this is in the comprehensive plan, and so one of the items that we would like you to think about, and for everyone involved in the process to think about, is that these areas are identified as gateways into the community, and One of the things about gateways in the comprehensive plan is that the comprehensive plan says that development at these locations should be held to a higher site design standard, including landscaping, building orientation, and streetscape amenities. And so one possibility would be to focus the use of planned commercial districts on areas that are identified as gateways or on impact streets in the community. And then John, if you could go to our neighborhood centers map. And so in our comprehensive plan, we have areas identified as neighborhood centers. And we had long discussions with the Planning Commission and others about creating a neighborhood center overlay district. And one of the concerns expressed by both staff and the Planning Commission was that if you put a different level of requirements or standards for the neighborhood centers, you might result in having people look outside neighborhood centers to develop elsewhere if you had criteria that was too different from the standard criteria. So one of the suggestions we made was, rather than trying to use the overlay district approach, to use the planned commercial approach, because then you would have a level playing field city-wide. But even if we have that approach, then the question still remains, and we need to be articulated in this text amendment, as when should a planned commercial district be required? So if we look at the map of where they have been required, it's either in gateways or impact streets, or also in cases where an applicant has applied for rezoning right next to a residential area, and neither the Planning Commission or City Commission felt comfortable with rezoning that without reference to a plan. And so we've had places such as 9th and Crawford and Ironton, Ohio, and places like that where planned commercial districts have been done because of concern about impacts on surrounding residential neighborhoods. So we would recommend that you reopen the hearing on this. We'd like to have your thoughts and input. We'd like you to receive whatever public comments or input there have to be presented. We would also recommend that the hearing on this be continued to August 15th to allow any changes, additions, or deletions that you might suggest or that members of the public might suggest to be incorporated. And there's also been a suggestion or a request that before that August 15th public hearing that you have a further study session on planned commercial districts, not so much to discuss the details of the text amendment or the ordinance, to more focus on the philosophical aspects of building permit review versus Planning Commission, City Commission review, and how the elements and concepts of the comprehensive plan might be incorporated into development review. So with that, we would entertain any comments or questions you have about the different slides or graphics that we presented. But again, requiring it in every single commercial rezoning application we recognize is overreaching. So we need to step back from that, but we need your help to figure out where we should step back to. And we also need help from the development community in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Commissioners?
I don't feel that it's an overreach. These are, prime areas that we think that will make a definite impact on the look and feel of the community, and I don't think that it's burdensome for developers. I don't think it would hurt that much.
When you're saying you don't think it's an overreach, are you speaking to the neighborhood center idea or the gateway idea, or are you talking about all across the board everywhere in the city?
Everywhere that we mentioned a planned commercial district.
But I mean, if somebody has a lot on near Broadway and Crawford, and they're wanting to rezone a lot to expand a commercial site. Are you suggesting that that should be done as a planned district, or are you suggesting that we should look when an application is filed to see whether it's in an identified neighborhood center or an identified gateway?
I think it's center or gateway.
Okay.
I think in general that's been our thoughts about this, but we've looked at it from different angles. Partially, we were looking at a way to simplify the process for developers and people that wanted to purchase and do some kind of development. But we also were concerned about the overall aesthetics and impact of development in these areas. But my understanding was that we were focused primarily on centers, neighborhood centers, gateways, places that significant change could occur. But I
Yes.
don't know. Did you
And
have some other?
We'll take responsibility for that, but as we were working through this and getting legal guidance and assistance from the city attorney, he felt that the simplest and the most legally defensible is to require it always, but that from a practical standpoint and a policy standpoint is not as defensible as it might be from a legal standpoint. So if we step back away from the concept that it's required in every instance, and we want to step back from that, we understood your focus to primarily be the neighborhood centers and the gateways into the community, and that is a possibility, but we wanted to see if we step back from that where you think a good place is to land.
Well, my issue with that is I am not really that certain that the places that are identified as neighborhood centers are neighborhood centers or gateways. We have often talked that perhaps they aren't. When we spoke, of, for example, of Schilling and Ohio, I believe, and some other areas, that perhaps they aren't gateways or perhaps they aren't neighborhood centers and they don't require that kind of oversight. So I don't know how we're going to choose and pick. That's the problem I'm having understanding.
Well, whether at this point in time, 7 years removed, you are in complete agreement with the areas identified as neighborhood centers in the comprehensive plan, nevertheless, these are the areas that have been identified in the comprehensive plan. And so for us, that is a starting point, and there is some correlation between those and where we have already used planned commercial as a tool. But if we're going to modify the areas that the plan has already identified as neighborhood centers or community centers, then that's going to involve some adjustments to the comprehensive plan. But what we're suggesting as a possible step back position is if there is an agreement and a geographical map or listing that says if you're in this neighborhood center or this identified gateway as identified on this map, then your application will have to be done as a planned commercial district. If you're outside of that, then you can just take advantage of the existing process for rezoning a piece of property. And if you are in an already existing commercial zoned area, then it is a matter of submitting a building permit and having review according to the existing commercial regulations, which would include sign regulations, landscaping, parking, those types of things.
And so that proposed map exists?
Well, it would be a combination of these, and we would be happy to put that together for you and for the development community, and that might be a good thing to present to you at a study session, should you hold that on August 15th, and see if we're on the right track.
I think that would be the logical next step, is that we had some proposed map if that's what we're going to work from. And that we did review that at a study session, because that would make sense to me. And I understand the combined places because we've worked with these issues, but I don't know that everyone does. So it would be good.
It would be incumbent on us to prepare such a map, share it with you and the development community and the city attorney to see if he thinks it's defensible. But that's something that we could do at a study session on the 15th of August.
Are there other questions for Mr. Andrew? Well, this is a public hearing item, and we do want to hear from the public. So I'll presume that there's someone here that wants to address this and give opinion on this. So if you could please approach the podium, state your name and address for us. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Jeff Mace, Compro Realty, 157 South 7th. I was one of a couple of the people that they mentioned in the development community that had been working with staff around this issue and did request a study session. Thought it'd be beneficial for us to have some open dialogue and talk about the impact of what was proposed, as well as the impact of just straight zoning and all things in between that. Not only as it affects Salina, but as it affects Salina from a competitive nature relative to how things are done in our neighboring communities, as Commissioner Stories has experienced in commercial activity around. It's done a lot of different ways, and just kind of have some of that dialogue before we went ahead and took such what we thought was also far-reaching action of eliminating all straight zoning in the community. That has a pretty substantial impact. So we just request for the time with you all in a study session to have some open dialogue.
So you'll be in attendance August 15th?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Myself and a number of others. I'm sorry that no one else is here, but we just request, we'd like you to postpone and give us an opportunity to come in and visit.
One thing we'd like to do, and this may be, let's see if it's helpful in your eyes, Jeff, would be to kind of lay out the timelines of the various approaches in terms of if you had a commercial project and it had to go to the Planning Commission and the City Commission for review, how that would compare to a standard building permit review or something in
And
between.
the impacts that has on our community when that's required in the eyes of real estate planners or developers or real estate directors for XY company, and just kind of what those implications are, and have some of that dialogue.
Anything else?
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mays. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Planning Commissioners, Greg Binkson, as legal counsel for the city. Just wanted to mention quickly as to the defensibility that has been discussed. The legal aspect of this discussion is relatively short. Obviously, the policy question is the primary one, and the one that you and all involved are most concerned with. There's really, as you might be aware, two considerations on anything that has to do with a zoning matter. One, is it reasonable, and was it lawful? The lawful aspect is the extent to which staff and you as the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Commission has followed its processes completely and as anticipated. My suggestion in terms of how you look at this, just to keep in the back of your mind from the legal standpoint, the concept of identification of when the planned zone is to be used as opposed to a straight zone is something that in my observation, somewhat from the bleachers, I haven't been so very actively involved, but it seemed like the threshold question of is it to be a planned district or is it to be a straight zone was one that seemed to be all too often possibly up in the air a little bit. It seemed to put, frankly, my observation, an undue burden, if you will, on staff to try to anticipate the Planning Commission and the governing body as to whether a particular site warranted plan zoning or not. It seemed to put the applicant somewhat in that situation as well, with probably, I suppose, is what is one of the worst things that could happen, and that would be to initiate an application in a way that ultimately had to change and take a step or two back, so to speak, in the process as this determination is made as to whether a particular site should be a planned site or a straight zone site. So obviously the draft is about as simple and objective as any could be in terms of thinking of any rezonings. Where you might wish to go from a policy standpoint, I think Mr. Andrew has certainly described well. We either have site-based, very objective criteria. It's either here or here or here. That's relatively simple, and I assume is probably the easiest. Don't want to speak for planning staff, but I assume that would be about as objective as one could arrive at. If we get away from that, we do need to try to have as specific a criteria as we possibly can to assist staff, to assist you, to assist applicants. So that all gets into the policy questions that I know you'll address as carefully as possible. But I just mentioned that as the legal framework. The more objective, obviously, the more defensible. Doesn't mean that it has to be absolutely black and white, but to the extent that it gets into any discretionary aspects, the stronger and the more precise the criteria can be, I think the better we will all be served. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ringson. I agree completely. Anyone else that wants to address this today? No?
So based on that guidance, our recommendation would be to continue the public hearing on this to your August 15th meeting, and also to authorize staff to schedule a study session on this subject in advance of that meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to continue this item in our August 15th meeting, and this is application Z 17-5, which will be continued until August 15th, and staff will prepare additional information and have a study session.
Correct.
All those in favor, vote aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next item is public hearing item 3.4, application Z17-2A, which is filed by Earls Engineering on behalf of Heaven Sent Properties, LLC, requesting a change in zoning from C5 to PC3. This is a property located at 720 South Ohio Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a public hearing item, and Mr. Hers and I are going to share the staff report. This is a two-part application, and I will attempt to explain to you the rezoning aspect of this, and then Mr. Hers is going to get into the actual site plan aspects of this. So, John, could you put up one of our zoning vicinity maps, please? By way of background on this property has taken several twists and turns in terms of its actual zoning status, but the initial application was for C5 zoning to join the eastern portion of Lot 10 with lots 8 and 9 to create a single C5 zoned lot. The Planning Commission expressed a desire to have the application converted to a planned C5 district, to have the opportunity to review the redevelopment plan and building design for the site. You deferred the submittal of a site plan for one meeting. At the close of that meeting, it came clear that that site plan was at best conceptual and didn't meet all of our requirements for a final site plan for a commercial district. And so you recommended approval of Plan C5 zoning to allow it to move ahead with the final site plan review being deferred to a later date prior to issuance of a building permit. The the City Commission concurred with you on their first reading, but on their second reading, they modified the ordinance on second reading to change the classification to Plan C3 instead of C5. And so what that left us as a staff and the potential developer is a divided zoning lot with two different sets of regulations that would be applicable. So if you could go back to the black and white one, John, because that's easier to read, and maybe blow it up a little bit. The black and white zoning vicinity map, please. So to better understand, the property that is the development site includes this strip right here, which is shown as PC3, and then this property right here that's 150 feet deep that is zoned C5. And so this application, to clarify, the property was purchased in April after the zoning was changed. This application was filed to create a single zoning lot with a unified Plan C3 zoning designation, so the property would be subject to a uniform set of development standards that applied to the whole site. As far as the distinction between C3 and C5, C3 and C5 both allow restaurants, but there's a number of differences in terms of their development standards, and we've also highlighted for you 11 uses that are allowed in C5 that aren't allowed in C3. And so C5 is generally viewed as a more intense zoning district than C3. And so we have summarized for you the various standards, and some of the differences deal with height. C5 allows a 50-foot height, whereas C3 limits it to 35 feet. As we noticed, the C3 district does not have any aesthetic requirements for buildings. Planned commercial districts do have some general aesthetic standards, and it gives you the authority to review the design, materials, and appearance of new buildings. And the comprehensive plan does state that quality design and materials should be used for all development to encourage long-term commitment to a location. And so there are two items that are deviations that are being requested under the zoning change. One is a reduction in the required amount of front yard landscaping area from 2,580 square feet to 2,005 square feet. And this is partially a result of this lot only being 105 or 150 feet deep. And then based on their desire to accommodate peak loads and also those members of the public who may wish to park and walk in, order, and carry out, the number of parking spaces that are being provided exceeds our minimum number by 8 spaces or 53%. And so those are the two deviations that are being requested. As far as the suitability of the site for development, the character of the neighborhood, public utilities and services, streets and traffic, those are just as they are and were when you had your public hearing to change the zoning from R2 to C5. So this lot was shown to be part of the neighborhood center for Crawford and Ohio. And so we think that with the unification of this lot, we think that is the preferred approach. We are not supportive of granting relief from the landscaping area requirement unless an equivalent amount of landscaping is provided as if the area requirement was being met. But we would recommend creating a unified Plan C3 zone lot, and we've summarized on page 17 of your report the reasons for doing so. We think the Plan C3 would be more consistent with the neighborhood center concepts in the comprehensive plan. The PC3 zoning would actually be a slight down zoning and would further reduce any negative impacts on neighboring property. And the southern 65 feet of this lot is Plan C3, and so approving this change would give the building site one unified zoning district. So our recommendation is to move forward and have a favorable action to create a unified Plan C3 zone lot. We did want to call out those two variations being requested, and our position as a staff to be consistent with other places where landscape area has been reduced. Those reductions have still resulted in the required amount of landscape material being provided. So with that, I would be open to any questions you had about why there is a zoning change being requested, and then I would turn it over to Dustin to describe the site plan for you.
Are there questions regarding the zoning change before we look at the site plan?
I was under the impression that we had already changed the zoning, otherwise the buyer wouldn't have purchased the property.
The zoning was changed, an ordinance was adopted, and the map changed, but our issue is that instead of granting the C5 that was requested, the City Commission granted C3. And so we had the southern 65 feet being C3 and the north 107 feet being C5. And it made more sense to us and to the applicant to have a single zoning lot with one set of regulations that apply. And so the idea, you see the area identified there as request area. The idea is that the Plan C3 would extend up to include those two lots. And so the entire proposed restaurant site would be zoned Plan C3, subject to a single plan and a single set of regulations.
Other questions? So we'll see the site plan.
All right, thank you. Okay, John, if we can start with the site plan, zoom in a little bit more if we can. One more time. All right, so this is what the site plan looks like, and I'm going to walk you through what is being proposed, and then we'll talk about some of the staff's concerns with what's being proposed so we can have a conversation about that. Currently, as proposed, there's two entrances off of Ohio. There's one on the north. If we scroll up just a little bit just to catch that north entrance there. North entrance here, and then one on the south. There is landscaping on a peninsula on the north side of the north driveway entrance, and then in the area between the two driveway curb cuts that are being proposed. Additionally, there's a little bit of landscaping out in front of the building, and then a 15-foot buffer on the south side of the property that is to act as a landscaping buffer between the commercial property and the existing residential property that's adjacent to the south. The building has an east-west orientation with this portion of the building facing Ohio Street and the main entrance being on the north side of the building. And so patrons that come to the restaurant have a couple of options. They can use the drive-through, which does have appropriate stacking according to our calculations and measurements, or they could park in the parking lot to the north of the property, or north of the building rather, and then they could walk into the indoor seating. There is additional landscaping between the proposed parking lot, the primary parking lot, and the building, and there's an additional, if we can go back to the west side, a little bit. Thank you, John. There's also an additional 3 off-street parking spaces out back with an employee kind of building. It's not really a building, but it's a structure that employees can use for breaks and whatnot. And there's some additional landscaping back here. The property, as it's being proposed, is also to act as the connection point to what we call the Smalley Plaza area, which is the building that you've probably seen back to the west side of this particular property. Because of this new development, this property, the Smalley Plaza, will be landlocked and won't have direct access. So we need to have an access easement from Ohio to get to the Smalley Plaza. And that's going to be one of the things we're going to talk about here. If we can go to our elevation drawings now, John. So the elevation drawings that we have show pictorially what appears to be some sort of masonry stone wainscoting with perhaps some ephes above that. Now, the plans, as we reviewed them, we didn't have a legend, so we're being somewhat speculative here, and we're going to need the applicant to make some confirmations if our assumptions are correct in that, and give us a little more clarification on what kind of materials we're using as well as the color. It does appear that there are some shutters. We're looking at the side that faces south right now. So you have the drive-through window, you have a balcony, you have 2 big shutters, 3 large shutters above that, and an awning. And then on the north face, which is the main entrance, you're going to have some shutters again and an awning, your wainscoting, and what appears to be ephes. And then on the side that faces Ohio, you'll have what we would call your main front that has the Popeyes wall sign and awning, and then again, some windows, and then wainscoting and potentially some ephes. And there you see the west side. So those would be what we see when we look at the elevation drawings. What we're needing to know is color and material specifically from the applicant. If we go back to, let's go to the site plan modification drawing, John, and we'll talk about some of the concerns that we have with the site. So one of the concerns that we have is restaurants are required to have a 10 by 25 foot loading unloading area for them to deliver supplies and inventory to their sites for their operations. And what we don't see is where that would be located on the site. So we'll need clarification of where that particular loading unloading area will take place on the site. And if it's not going to take place on the site, we would need a letter on company letterhead that commits to doing all deliveries on what we call non-business operation hours. So if their operations take place from 7 in the morning till 9 at night, it would have to take place between 9 in the evening and 7 a.m. when they open up the next day. That's what they would be committing to in that situation. And then another thing that we would need some clarification on is we see the trash enclosure here on the south kind of west end of the parking lot area, and it does appear to be fully enclosed, but we don't have elevation drawings, and we'd like to have some information about what specifically the height and materials are and color for that trash enclosure and how that's going to conform to the rest of the site and the principal building. And then we also don't have any information on the pole sign other than the proposed location, and we would be looking for information of the size and height that we'd be looking at for you guys to review and to look at for that pole sign or ground sign, whatever is being proposed there. Then we also have some revisions that we think need to be made before the site plan can be finalized, and there's a few concerns that we have. The first is really the access and the challenge that the site has to access. With Ohio and Crawford being the busiest intersection in the community, there's concern of how people are going to get in and out of the site. The median that you see when you go by there is somewhere in this area. So there is a median oh, I don't know if I can see it. Can't quite make it out from that scale, John. It goes past Faith Drive, I believe. So right around where I've got my dot, I believe, is where it ends. Is that right, Kent? You think? Okay. So this gives you kind of an idea that, so the first entrance would be blocked by that median that you see, that's intermedian in Ohio. The second entrance would be open to that. And so what we've proposed, if we can go back to that site plan, John, is allowing left turns in, but only allowing right turns out. So not allowing left turns out of here because of the timing of the stoplight and when it turns red, and how that may interfere with drive-through traffic getting stacked up if they're serving quicker than 80 seconds a person. So there could be some problems there. So in order to do that, we've proposed having a modification to the site that pushes traffic or lets people know that they have to get over to the right side of the lane, and then having some kind of a triangle median here that directs people directly to the south, and so that they can make a right turn, but they're not really capable of making left turns and they don't get confused. What that would do is keep the entrance open for left turns in, or people even coming right turn in from the north, so that we don't have a car sitting here in the entrance and people trying to get in and potentially causing an accident. So those would be a couple of modifications that we would propose. We also would propose that the sidewalk be labeled so that it's really clear of where the sidewalk is, the public sidewalk that is. And that if we go to the, zoom in on this area, John, if you can. And scroll up a little bit more so that this is kind of centered. Okay. So then that brings us to access of what we call the Smalley Plaza. And currently it looks like the opening is proposed about where I'm putting my highlighter, my laser pointer. And the concern that staff has with this is if there is an access easement granted and this is the opening, the parking for the Smalley Plaza patrons is going to be right here. So the car is going to park 90 degrees this way, and if you have the opening here, it's going to run vehicles right into where they're parked. And so what we would suggest is moving that to the south so it's in line with the driving aisle that exists on the Smalley Plaza, so that the driving aisles kind of connect and have a natural flow to them to have a better circulation and access for that. And then when we look at the landscaping, there's a couple of things that the landscape regulations require that need to be addressed with this particular plan. One, as has been noted with the request for deviation from the strict application of the landscaping area, we don't have quite the amount of landscape area that would typically be required for a brand new greenfield development. Now, the site, as you can see, is already kind of tight, so we understand that, and our problems aren't necessarily with the area per se, but with the what we call number of tree units. So this particular site is required to have an additional 2 1/2 tree units, and also all landscape areas have to be covered by 60% living material. So what that means is the landscape areas that they have proposed along Ohio appear to be primarily rock with a few shrubs, particularly here. We've got 6 shrubs in a rather long span, and the rest is just rock. And what we need is some actual trees, whether they be ornamental trees or shade trees, being proposed and added to that island, as well as some ground cover. The same is true for the peninsula just on the north side of the north entrance. There's 1 tree and looks like 4 shrubs there, and then the rest is just rock. And we need to have a little more green, actual green space, living material in those islands.
Before you go too far,
Yes.
if you put in trees there, then I presume that sign will be at ground level and the trees will block the view of that sign.
Well, that's always part of the design consideration when you're planting trees and selecting trees to use. But what I will note is that all new commercial development is required to have X amount of tree units and front yard landscaping, and a lot of them still choose to have a sign, and they figure out a way to make it work. But yeah, you're right that if you add trees here, there may be some issues that you want to consider in terms of what am I doing to the visibility of the site.
But the trees could be put to the back side.
Well, there's a lot of different ways that this could probably be designed to minimize the impact or the visibility issues that you would have with the sign. And then on the south landscape buffer, the plan, if you look closely, it has 15 feet, but it's only showing like 12 feet of landscaping, with the 3 feet south of the proposed fence being just shown as white on the plan. And what we would propose is that the fence actually be moved to the property line on the south to make sure that we have all of the landscape area dedicated towards the proper landscape area that's needed and required on that area, and that all of the plantings here be re-looked at, because at least 1/3 of them in the landscape buffer have to be an evergreen variety. And that could be your trees, it could be your shrubs, but at least 1/3 of your plantings that you propose have to be of an evergreen variety from our xeriscape plant list. And so those would be our major concerns, and we think that if those items could be addressed and the site plan could be modified, if the applicant agrees to that, then we would recommend approval with the 8 conditions that we have at the bottom of page 20. And you can look at them and I can answer questions about them, or we can go through them. It's really up to you on what you want to do with our time constraints considering.
I assume the applicant has been given this information in terms of
Yes, it's been
revision.
mailed out.
But there is not a revised site plan tonight.
No, this went out on Friday when it went out to you guys. So that would have been when they would have received this information, would have been Thursday or Friday.
So your suggestion is that the site plan be revised with these
Yes.
requirements?
What we were thinking is, because this particular zoning request has to go before the city commission and the governing body for their final review, that if you're in agreement with our analysis and what our recommendations are, that those changes could be made and before it is proposed to the city commission, and then they could confirm that they have been completed or not.
Questions?
I find the plant list is very lacking, especially on the south side, but the plant schedule that is listed shows Nandina, which I presume is on the,
I'm not familiar with it, no.
well, it's got a poisonous berry, and birds eat it and die. And so I think that should be taken off. And I wish there were, the little blue stem is a native plant, which is great, but the Shantung maple is not. And the pearl bush is a artificial hybrid, and it'd be nice if that were a native plant too.
So some of our concerns, and Dustin has the highlighter there, but of the 4 maple trees that are proposed on the plan, 3 of them are directly behind the building, so they're not visible and they don't add much to the streetscape. The other aspect of that is that when we refer to landscape area, we're referring to at least 60% of that area being living material. So if you focus on page 19 of your report, we believe that items 1 through 4 need to be addressed by the applicant today by providing additional information about how those are going to be addressed. And then what we're looking for on items 1 through 9 on page 19 and 20 is to go over those with representatives of the applicant to see if they're willing to make those revisions to make this plan work better and better comply with our requirements.
Who has determined that this egress and ingress right turn only is feasible or would absolutely work in this situation?
That would be a combination conversation between planning staff and engineering staff, and we do have Kent Johnson here from our engineering department to speak a little bit about that if you have specific questions.
Yeah, I would. I'm sorry, who?
Kent Johnson.
Could you approach, please? State your name and address.
Kent Johnson. I'm with the City of Salina's Engineering Department.
Could you just illuminate a little bit more how that would work with the island there, how people are getting in from either direction, north or south, and how they're exiting?
How people would be getting in and getting out?
Coming from both directions.
Obviously, people coming from the north can make right turns in to the site. The issues, right turns are not usually an issue. It's the left turns that are more difficult. In this case, we would probably prefer that nobody turn left in or left out of that south entrance. You can't do either one at the north because of the raised median along Ohio Street. We have a lot of people like, in businesses, they like to get people into their businesses and so forth. So we've kind of made an accommodation, or at least I made an accommodation when I made that recommendation, is that we could probably live with the left ins coming into the site. They will stack up in the left turn lane on Ohio Street at Crawford. As far as the left outs are concerned, that will be a real issue. I call this the busiest intersection in town. I haven't checked the counts in quite some time, but I think there are about 40,000 cars that go through that intersection on a daily basis. A rule of thumb in engineering is that if an intersection has 40,000 cars in a day, that the peak hour would be about 10% of that. So you would find about 4,000 cars at that intersection during the peak hours. The peak hours happen to be the times when people are eating. So it would be from 5 to 6 in the evening, 7 to 8 in the morning, and then over the lunch hour. So the way that the intersection is set up, the signal has a 2-minute cycle to it. It's 120 seconds. 80 seconds of that cycle will bring cars directly by that entrance. So there will be an 80-second block of time every 2 minutes where it will be almost impossible to get a car out of that entrance making a left.
Okay, so if a car is traveling north, how is it turning into this property?
It will get into the left turn lane. There are 5 lanes at that location.
And exit the left turn lane prior to reaching the island?
Correct.
And then at the island point, it would be locked into the turn lane to turn left on Crawford.
That's correct. If they decided not to make the left turn into that entrance,
But
they could just go
that-
north up to the intersection
That
and make
car
the
would
left.
be waiting for any cars going southward
That is correct.
before it could turn,
Correct.
which would cause a stack quite a ways back from the traffic light,
That's
because
correct.
we're already back one street back from the traffic light.
Mm-hmm.
How far does that turn lane extend past this entrance on Ohio in
Well, as
front
you
of this
can see,
building?
you can see with the arrows in that middle lane there. You can see these are arrows that go in both directions. So that is a 2-way left turn lane that extends back
runs
quite a
the
ways.
entire length of that,
Correct.
of Ohio there.
And like I said, that's not an ideal situation, but it's a capitulation that we've made because we're trying to encourage businesses in town. So
Well, obviously, this is a discussion we had initially when we talked about that's kind of what led to this whole episode. But I'm still trying to understand why the site plan came without that modification. I mean, why? Who thought it was feasible to bring it with traffic patterns that couldn't actually occur?
Just by way of explanation of the timing, we had a meeting with the developers and the city's development review team before the application was filed, and we went through a detailed review of the conceptual plan that we were given, and we provided these comments. And so the items 1 through 9 that you see in our report were items that we spoke to the applicant about in the development review team meeting, but between that meeting and today's hearing, the plans were not modified to reflect any of those comments or changes. So what we chose to do was to take the site plan we received and make our markups on it so that these reflect comments that we gave to them at the development review team meeting before the application was submitted. And so what we're doing this afternoon is reinforcing those same comments. And the primary thing that's different that caught us a little, that was somewhat confusing, is that it appeared to us that the fence at the south end was set in 3 feet from the property line, which would basically mean that those residential neighbors would be responsible for mowing and maintaining 3 feet of this property, and that didn't make sense to us, so we were suggesting that the fence be slid to the south so it's actually located on the line. Those are the only things that we did not provide as feedback at the development review team meeting. So what you see here with those markups on the plan were things that we provided in the way of feedback to the applicant.
And then no changes were made.
We did not receive anything different as a result of that development review team meeting.
Thank you.
I have a
I'm sorry.
question too. John, could you put the aerial photo back? And it looks like to me that right where Ohio ST is, that's the T is where that island starts.
It's actually a little south of that.
Okay, well then that would preclude anybody making a right-hand turn going into that area.
It wouldn't prevent a right-hand turn. It would
I'm a left-hand
prevent
turn.
a left-hand
Yeah, a left-hand
turn,
turn, yes.
not where the south driveway is located. The south driveway that you're seeing on the site plan is south of the end of the median island.
But I thought that was an exit only.
No, it is. What we're
Proposed.
suggesting is it's a right out only. It would allow, the south driveway would allow northbound traffic on Ohio to get into the center turn lane and turn left into here. We're assuming that most southbound traffic is going to pull into the north driveway, but they would also be able to pull in to that southern driveway, make a right turn in, and then the circulation is to go around the building and either park on the north or go around through the drive-through. But what we're suggesting is when you leave the drive-through and you exit, the only way you can go is south. And that be reinforced by use of an island and curbing to reinforce that movement.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Other questions for staff before we hear from the applicant? No? Is the applicant here? Your name and address, please.
Glenn Knock with Earls Engineering here in Salina. And as far as the request and the applications with the site plan, we did discuss that at the review meeting with them. And the applicant and us, we have agreed on that. In fact, we have actually made most of the changes to the plans. I did not realize he was waiting for them prior to this meeting. I thought that he needed them for the building permit application, which was what we were in the process of trying to put together. And so we didn't have the changes with the turn lane modifications in there, but we have been incorporating those into the plans, and we have agreed to everything with what they have asked for in the building permit, or in the review meeting when we were working through that. So it's not that we're not agreeing to it or we haven't addressed that. We have and we are addressing those, and we will meet the requirements and the comments that are on the plans that we went through at the meeting.
Well, the first 4 items are primarily items that you can easily revise on the plan. But the remaining items, I believe we need answers about, don't we? Such as where the location is of a 10-foot by 25-foot loading, unloading zone, landscaping issues, coverage of landscaping on the lot.
We'll need to go back and review and revise the landscaping plan, and then I will take a look at the loading and the loading platform for where they will be loading. I think what they were talking about was primarily loading or servicing it after hours, but I will confirm that with the client as we're working through it. So.
And what about exterior of the building? The question came up in colors and materials.
That part I'm going to have to get back with you from the architect on. I don't have the exterior colors of the building.
Okay.
I think they're pretty standard in all of their buildings nationwide, but
Okay. Does anyone have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Good?
It could be I'm not understanding. You're asking for a variance to provide more parking spaces? Is that what it says? So it seems like that could be green space, couldn't it?
Yes, our regulations have a limit on the maximum amount of off-street parking that can be provided for restaurants. And the way that works is there's a required amount of off-street parking required based on the seating capacity of a restaurant and the dining area. In this particular case, they're going to have 46 dining room seats for people that come to Popeyes and sit and eat. That requires 15 off-street parking spaces. What the code allows is the maximum is 25% more than what the required is. So in this case, you're looking at adding up to 19 parking spaces is what staff would be allowed to allow administratively. Anything above and beyond that would require either a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals or an exception by you and the City Commission as the governing body through the plan district. And so we are required, or they are requesting to have more than 19 off-street parking spaces. They're requesting 23. So that requires that an exception or a variance be made to that provision of the maximum parking.
So in response to the question, they could eliminate some of the parking and resolve the coverage and landscaping issue.
What they could do is they could add additional landscaping, but the way we calculate front yard landscaping is the amount of green space area in the front 25 feet. And so what they might be able to do is they might be able to extend, my pointer's kind of...
Because there are no
up.
parking places in the front 25 feet.
There are no parking
Yeah.
spaces, but there is access and turning and traffic circulation movements.
I believe we have actually met and exceeded the required square footage of landscaping. It's just with the amount of lanes and the to get around the front of the building, we can't get it in the top 25 feet, which is the reason we did add and took out a couple of parking spaces to add the stalls over there to try to make it so that it was in the front of the yard, but it is technically not in the front 25 foot, which is where the required landscaping is. So we have met the minimum area. We just can't get it in the front 25 feet.
No. If I got the point back. So what Mr. Kanak is saying is they extended this particular landscaping island out. And so what staff has done is we calculated how much landscaping is in the front 25 feet and double counting the buffer here, the landscaping that's in the front 25 feet in front of the building, all of this landscape area here and the landscaping area all the way back to the back, not just what's in the front 25 feet, but all the way to this first stall. And we come up with 2,265 square feet. The total required is 2,580 square feet. So we're getting really close, but we're still about 315 square feet basically short, which would be about 2 parking stalls if that helps.
We can move the parking stalls there in the front, and we can add some more up there and take out 2 more parking stalls up there and move that on the north side to give a larger buffer island in that area on the north side.
And the plan is to move the south fence to the south property
Yes.
line.
And doesn't seem to be a lighting plan?
I didn't see a lighting plan. What we would do is we would confirm that any exterior lights, whether they be on the exterior of the building or parking lot lights, are all what we call shoebox style downcast lights, so that we're not having any light spill on the adjacent residential properties or in the streetway.
My question, okay.
Other questions for the applicant?
Well, I just kind of think that the landscape plan is incomplete, not, outside of the square footage necessary. So is it possible to approve all of this with further review of the landscape plan?
What our recommendation is in regards to landscaping is twofold, that if you do grant a variation as to the area, that you only do so with a requirement that they provide the required amount of plantings and plant material. The other thing is that you can require that all the plant selections be from the city's recommended xeriscaping list, and we would do that in any event through the building permit review. But if you want to make as part of your motion a specific that the Nandino plant be deleted, then that would give us the direction to get that modified. But we're suggesting that the request is to reduce the amount of front yard landscape area, but that should not be implied that you're approving this plan or that you are granting a reduction in the amount of front yard plant material.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Not? We'll close the public hearing. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mary Schaefer, 1012 Millwood. I have a concern with the parking. Where are the employees going to park? Are they going to be over on Millwood, or are they going to be in here? You've only talked about those that go to the restaurant.
Right. And the off-street parking regulations for restaurants are designed to accommodate both employees and customers. So the off-street parking that is required for restaurants based on one parking space for every 3 seats is designed to accommodate both the employees and the customers. So this site would have all off-street parking contained within this property.
Okay. Then, looking at this, where the drive-through window is,
Yes.
many times at restaurants, you have to wait. And where are those people going to wait? That seems very congested right there. You know, they pull up, or there's a parking place that you go. So has that been addressed? And where do they order? Is that over here on the in-between?
If you can zoom in on the back side, John. So back here is the menu board and ordering station back here.
Okay.
And the window is roughly
Right there.
right here. And there's going to be like a canopy area that you drive under that you can see on the elevation drawings. But so you order here, and then there's additional stacking spaces, and you pick up your food here. Now, some restaurants, you're correct, some will have a drive-through kind of wait if it's taking a long time, but it's not necessarily required. Not all drive-throughs have that, and nor are they required to. So some drive-throughs, if it just takes a while to get your food, then you just wait at the window until you get your food. And I can let the applicant speak to that, but from the drawing, that would be my interpretation of how their operations would go about.
And that green area, what did you say that was?
So what we are proposing is the area on the east side, or what we would call the front part of the building here, is currently, so there's some green space on landscaping, and the original drawing shows it coming straight through. What we don't want to have is we don't want people coming through the drive-through, getting their food, and then coming up here and then blocking the intersection, because it's such a critical part of this particular site. We want to make sure that there's some curbing directing vehicles to what we call the south driving aisle, so they can make a right turn out, and to protect this area for anyone that's coming in, so that we don't have a car pulling out while somebody's coming in and creating a potential accident, just to make it a safer site and improve site circulation.
Okay, now I'll give you a real headache. I want to know why the employee patio and the trash cannot be up on the north, rather than at Jack's bedroom window and his patio. And we have kids that, there are duplexes there with children, usually. And you're going to have, what I see an employee patio is that's where they go for their smoke breaks, they play their music, they do whatever. I think that would be better up there on the north side where the other restaurants are, and rather than right by the residential part.
So, John, if you can scroll up to a little further to the north. So what you're proposing is moving the area that they're proposing for employees here up to one of these parking stalls or something?
Yes.
One of
That
the
seems, and the trash.
one of
in
the
some way. Go
unique
ahead.
aspects of this site is that the north 2/3 of it is 150 feet deep, and the south part is the deepest part at 185 feet.
About the lot.
And so the other aspect of that is that we are requiring a 6-foot screening fence that is not there today, that will separate the restaurant operation from the residential backyard. So in addition to that landscape buffer, there will be a 6-foot solid fence that won't necessarily eliminate sound, but it won't be as if people will be looking from their backyards directly into the trash enclosure or to the parking or employee shelter area. But as to the reason why they located it there, it's my belief because they had 35 extra feet of depth to work with there, and that's where it fit. So if
I'm sure that's true. I'm just making a suggestion, since there's a residential area there. The original plans for this subdivision was a 65-foot buffer. Now you're down to 15 feet. And, pretty soon there won't be any buffer.
Well, 15 is what's required, so they would have to maintain it.
Sure, I understand that. But the original plans, if you go back and look at the original plans, was 65 feet, and that's a lot. I can understand that. All the other businesses around there have a street that is a buffer. A street, I looked up, a city street is about 28 feet. They're just getting too close to the residential area. I'm not against Popeyes, and the area certainly needs updating. But, I think they need to move the trash, and they need to move the employee patio up there. I can go outside, and I have neighbors that smoke. That's fine. but it does come over. And they're not close, I mean, they're not right next to me smoking. So it's going to happen there that it will drift over to those people that are the residents. And so I think that if there's some way they can incorporate, move things around a little bit, I realize that that's kind of a little extra piece there. Maybe they can come up with something. They're innovative people, and so those are my suggestions.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. Are there other members of the public? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
Yeah, I'm Jack Copeland, 1019 Millwood.
Yes, sir.
Mary pretty well covered what I wanted to talk about, other than this trash bin where it is. If you couldn't go clear to the north end, why couldn't you go right behind the building over there where that evergreen's all by itself, put the trash over there and bring the evergreen down here, and you have a lot more room for your employees in the first place to park. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, I believe what you've suggested is to eliminate.
Yeah, take that tree out of there.
And then move this to
Yeah, or
this
just
direction.
get rid of it, one of the two.
I think the reason for that is because in order to do that, you would be changing the orientation of the parking stalls, which changes the dimensional requirements, and I don't know if they have enough area to meet all those dimensional requirements. I can't confirm that they don't, but that, based on the way that it's laid out here on the site, that would be my speculation.
Well, in that case, then I would still be in favor of going clear up to the north end, because you got the Subway up there with their trash at the south end. Why couldn't Popeyes be up there at the north end? Trash company could pick up everything right there, and we wouldn't have to be putting up with the smell and everything else coming over into our residential area. And then those two driveways there where that little median strip is, even though it tapers down to nothing, and when you pull up there in the middle lane that could supposedly turn to the left, in order to get in there, you're going to have to pull against the traffic, so you can't do that. And then by making that southern entrance and exit, it better be a wide one, because you're going to have a bottleneck right there. Because of all the years that I've been there, I count these cars coming up and down Ohio Street, and when they get through going through Crawford at that intersection, I've counted up to 55 and 60 cars, and I'm telling you right now, they're not going 40 miles an hour. Very few of them. More like 60 and 80. It's going to not be a bottleneck, it's going to be a killer. Wait and see. But other than that, there is, when they go to put the parking, the drive, and everything in there, I certainly hope they've got a survey on that, so that when it rains and rains hard, the rain won't come over into my backyard, because if there is, I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah, what they'll have to do is have a grading plan that directs all the water to Ohio Street.
That's right, exactly. Because the old boy that had that building there right behind me, one time it rained pretty hard, about 6 inches, and the whole basement was full, and he had all his air conditioners, furnaces, and everything else down there. He lost it all. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there other members of the public? If not, we'll close the public hearing.
I have one other question.
Yes, sir.
Too. The access to that Smalley property, is it?
Yes.
What's to prevent the customers from using that? And the aerial photo shows there's a car behind that building. Is there another way
When you
out?
say behind the building. There is no other way out. John, you'll have to go to the aerial photo, and the thing is that people don't have to consult us, or they don't have to get permission to create or I don't have the ability to prevent people from landlocking themselves. And so if somebody said, I want to create this lot and build a building on it, we would deny the building permit because it doesn't have any access or frontage. But Mr. Smalley owned all this property, and then he sold it off piecemeal and landlocked himself. But what he did do was he obtained an easement across this property to get back there, and that easement's going to be modified to prevent, but there's no way out, in or out of this property except back through the Popeye site. There's no way to get to Crawford. There's no way to get to Lewis. If you're on the Smalley property, the only way to get out is to back out to Ohio. And so we're, as part of the conditions, we're recommending that these owners modify that easement, and we have suggested in our staff report that the place where they're showing the opening would take a driver right into the side of this parked vehicle, so we're recommending that it be slid to the south.
Okay. And what's to prevent them from going across that empty field there?
There's nothing that prevents them from doing it today. There's no, part of it is the condition of the field where you'd probably lose the bottom of your vehicle, and the other, there's no curb cut on the other side, but that, yeah, there's some barriers over here. But our plan, our suggestion is that these owners modify the existing easement and grant this property the right to ingress and egress Ohio across this property so that it's not landlocked. And part of that is also for emergency services response. We do want to be able to physically reach that property with emergency services. So in terms of I think the only thing that we can't answer or we haven't heard the specific on, we can't tell you exactly what the exterior material is going to be for the trash enclosure. We can't tell you what the ground or pole sign is going to look like. Normally that's something that we can do. We are making an interpretation of the elevation drawings that we receive because they're not labeled as to materials, but we interpret them to be EFS, and we will admit that part of that is from drawings that we have reviewed from other municipalities where Popeyes have been built, and we're able to deduce that information from those drawings as well as the colors. So what we have suggested is if you want to act favorably on the zoning, you would be making a recommendation for the zoning to change on the north piece to Plan C3, and then a separate action would be any action that you would take on the site plan. And what you would need to decide is we've identified 9 things that we believe need to be revised or modified on the site plan before it goes before the city commission, but our list of 9 does not include relocation of this trash enclosure or anything dealing with that. So if the planning commission wants to condition their approval on this trash enclosure being relocated up to there, and if you want to expand on the planting list to say that the Nandino plant needs to be deleted, and that any variation that's granted for the amount of green space does not include a variation to the required planting material, that is what we're suggesting. But the variations that are being requested would be addressed through the ordinance that rezones the property. So those variations are really part of your zoning action. And then what you would need to decide is whether you want to include relocation of the trash enclosure location as part of a site plan revision.
So can we approve the zoning without the variances?
You could approve the zoning and decline to approve the variances if you made a recommendation that way. If you did that, they would have to modify their plan to reduce their parking from 23 to 19, and they would have to come up with a way, which I don't believe is physically possible, to come up with 2,580 square feet, because you can't make them delete a parking stall because there's none proposed in this area. It is a fact that if you put this curb line in there and curve it a little bit, you're going to gain a slight amount of green space there. But there's nothing, based on the need for driveways and circulation, there's nothing creative that Mr. Hers and I could do to come up with 2,580 square feet in the front yard. So our approach was to say we may reduce the amount in the front yard, front 25 feet. If you want them to deepen this, you can do that. If you want them to deepen that and have us count that, we can do that. But there's no way, based on the amount of area that's available here and what's needed for circulation, that you can come up with 2,580 square feet of green space within that area.
So how are you recommending approval of a planned C3 zoning lot and then stating that you're not supportive of granting relief from the front yard landscaping area?
We are supportive of granting relief from the front yard landscaping area. What we are not supportive of is granting relief from the planting requirements, which requires them to have at least 5 total tree units within the front yard area. Our review indicates that they have provided 2.5 tree units in the front yard, which we have determined is not sufficient. And so what we're saying is we think that they can justify having less than 2,580 square feet in their front yard area, but we don't think there's any justification for having half the amount of tree units as what the ordinance requires. So when you reviewed the plan for the Quick Shop out of Centennial and Crawford, you granted them relief from the minimum front yard green space requirement, but you required Quick Shop to have the same amount of plant material as if so what they have is smaller area, more densely planted, and so that's what we're suggesting here, is that there's simply no way to get 2,580 in the front yard there, but there's also no reason not to require 5 total tree units within that front yard area. So we are supportive of the variation to the amount of green space because of the physical limitations of the site. We are not supportive of granting relief from the number of plantings. And maybe Dustin can explain it better than I did, but their plan that we reviewed not only lacks the area, but it also doesn't have the number of front yard tree units that would be required. And so you're seeing trees, 2 trees and a 3rd tree that are located behind the building, and our landscape ordinance encourages those trees to be out in the front to dress up the streetscape.
Is there a minimum height requirement for the plantings in the buffer zone when they're installed?
As for the screening junipers, it's if you had junipers there screening, they would need to be 6 feet tall at the time of planting.
At the time of planting. And the fence must be 6 feet tall, too.
Correct. There is not a minimum for the trees or the bushes that would be planted there. But for the evergreens, it's 6 feet.
And there's a required amount of evergreens? Is that how the plan is?
One-third of the tree units in that buffer on the south have to be evergreens, so they provide some year-round buffer.
And can we say that those additional tree units could be on the west edge of that, where their sign is? I mean, there's plenty of room there for additional trees.
Right. We're suggesting that the variation as the area be approved, and they're shy on the number of trees. Our expectation is that's the only place you could put trees, and what we're saying is, as long as you, as a planning commission, don't grant them a variation from the amount of landscape material, then we will make sure that they have 5 tree units, and that is a logical place for them to go.
So basically, you would like to see this approved, and then you would make certain that these requirements were met and that these revisions were done, and then it would be presented to the city commission for their approval.
Ideally, these revisions would have been made, and that you would be reviewing a revised plan today. But we were not able to accomplish that for you despite our best efforts. And so what we attempted to do was to itemize those same revisions that we outlined at our development review team meeting and summarize them here. And what we have on bottom of page 20 is a condition that says all requested revisions shall be made to the site plan and landscape plan prior to city commission consideration of the site plan. So our thought is that until such time as we get a plan that contains all those revisions, it cannot go to the city commission for their action. But it's your decision today whether you think this is in order for approval, and what we've tried to do is assist it moving forward, but having you articulate those things to the applicant that you feel need to be revised or clarified.
Oh, well, you can all go back and watch the video of my theory and thoughts about this particular project from the beginning. So I'm not going to pretend like I didn't think it was trying to fit a too big foot into a too small shoe. And I'm troubled somewhat because I feel like it's taken a tone that by trying to preserve safety, health, and welfare of the people that would live nearby, that we are seen somehow as trying not to further development in the community, which that bothers me, especially being a developer myself. There's a million reasons why we want development in Salina, and this restaurant probably has a purpose and could certainly be on this site, but I have never actually seen how it fits on this site from the very beginning. I know we can squeeze it on there and make it fit, but I am not sure that is development in its proper form. I have been troubled all along by the houses on Millwood that would have this behind them. I'm not really feeling like a 6-foot fence and some trees is adequate to protect a view or property values. But I know that, obviously it's not my role here to sit and decide what development is appropriate for Salina. But I can't support something that I know impacts people around it just solely to move development forward in Salina. I'm also troubled by the traffic pattern. If I go to McDonald's, I go through the drive-thru, which is why I don't. I come out that side over here. I can't turn back on to the direction I'm going, usually, which is the other way. So I drive through that neighborhood. I end up somewhere down here on some street where there are some townhomes. And then I turn around and I drive all the way back north again, just because I couldn't make a turn out of that street across the street from McDonald's drive-through. So I'm not understanding what's any different on this side of the street. Because I would have to go out again. I leave this place, I go out south, I drive, I amble through Millwood, turn up Lewis. Eventually I get home. But not certainly in any direct route. I don't think that asking for this to be a planned development was something that we thought. I thought the objective was to further our ability to control it. And I'm not feeling like we actually have that, ability in this particular case. But so I personally cannot approve this site plan. But if we move it forward, which is probably the case, I guess we can let the city commission decide that.
Well, you are certainly free to make a recommendation that this site plan not be approved, and it will go to the city commission with that recommendation. But the other option, of course, is to decide that it's not ready for action. But if you believe it's not in a position where you can recommend approval of the plan, then that is what the majority of commissioners need to do. But what we have tried to do is identify in what we think is great detail. You have indicated that you don't feel like you have the ability to regulate or control this plan, but that is exactly what we have tried to give you by identifying all these things and saying, if you identify these as required revisions, then you are going to be influencing this plan in a direction that makes it more compatible with the neighbors. And if we have left something out, such as relocation of the trash enclosure or other things, that is a decision for you. But you have two decision points this afternoon. One is to recommend or not recommend that the zoning be unified into a planned C3 district, and as part of that, whether you want to approve the variations as to green space area, front yard green space area, and parking. That is decision point number one. The second decision point is whether you wish to recommend approval or not recommend approval of the site plan as submitted. But your first action is to decide whether you wish to recommend approval or not recommend approval of Plan C3 zoning as opposed to the current C5 zoning. And
Well, I certainly think that it would be advantageous to rezone to the Plan C3 for everyone involved, including the neighbors nearby. And I don't have a problem with that part of the process at all.
I don't either. And I think that my feelings are that we change the zoning with the variations and then a postpone of the decision on the plot plan.
So we need separate motions?
first motion, first item for consideration is whether you wish to recommend to the City Commission that the Lot 8 and Lot 9 portion of this site be rezoned to PC3 so that we have a unified zoning lot.
I would do that.
And that
Thank you all.
that is identified on page 16 and 17, that you can recommend approval of the requested zoning change, including the requested deviations from the landscaping and off-street parking regulations. You could recommend approval to PC3, including only one of the requested deviations. You could recommend approval with no variations being granted, or you could recommend that the status quo be maintained and that the north 107 feet of this site retain its C5 zoning designation. So those options are identified on page 16 and 17 of your report. So choice 1 is you recommend the zoning change and include the requested deviations from front yard green space and to allow the additional parking spaces. You could recommend approval of the zoning change and identify only one of those deviations or variations you feel comfortable with. You could recommend that this be Plan C3 and that none of those variations be granted. Or you could recommend to the City Commission that the status quo be maintained and that the north 107 feet retain its C5 zoning.
So, Commissioner Story, then, does that motion include the provision that 5 tree units is being provided additionally? In that statement of number 1, does that include that? On page 16?
If you were to recommend that this zoning change be approved with those 2 deviations, and you qualify it by saying that that is a deviation as to area but not as to the amount of landscaping that's provided, then that would address that. So that would say that the amount of green space you see there is what you get, but within that green space, you are not granting them any relief from the requirement that they provide at least 5 tree units of landscaping, which is shade, ornamental, and shrubs in some combination.
And that is staff's recommendation.
That is our recommendation.
So, Mr. Story, do you understand what I'm saying?
Right.
That number 1 alternative would be altered to with the addition that that is area but not amount of tree units?
Yes. That the variation is to area but not the amount of landscaping material provided.
Was that your intent?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved that we recommend approval of the requested zoning change to PC3, including the requested deviations from the landscaping and off-street parking regulations, with the understanding that I can't even read my own writing. That variation is limited to what? It does not include.
Is limited to the area but does not include the amount of landscaping.
Is limited to the area but does not include the amount of landscaping provided. Does everyone understand that?
Now, if we want to address issues like the dumpster and the employee break area.
That would be in the next.
That would be in the
Okay,
next
I just
item.
wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that would be in the next segment. This would provide for the zoning
Got it.
Right.
change. Any discussion on that aspect? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
One opposed? Motion carries. And that would bring us to the second aspect of this, the site plan issue, and whether or not you are desiring approval of it,
Go through the items 1 through 4 on page 18, 35.
or the alternatives.
Postpone.
So we have a few alternatives here for you. You could recommend approval of the proposed site development plan subject to whatever conditions the Planning Commission believes are reasonable and appropriate. And that would potentially include any of them that staff has recommended in the report or any that have come up with through conversations with people from the public. You could recommend approval of the proposed site development plan subject to certain revisions and or corrections being made to the plan. 3, you could recommend denial of the proposed site development plan as subject citing the reasons thereof. Or 4, you could postpone consideration of the application if the commission believes there is a need for additional information before taking any action on the application.
I prefer number 4.
Which is to postpone consideration?
And so if we did postpone, are we saying then we would like to see a plat with these things addressed. And would it come back
Well,
to us, or does it
I
go
think,
automatically
yes,
to
you
the?
would, if you postpone it, you would give the reasons why you postpone it, and you would give some direction to the applicant on what it is that you're wanting to see and why you're postponing it, so that they could address those issues when they brought it back to you. So that when they brought the plan back to you, it was hopefully more acceptable to you, if that's what you're wanting to do. If you don't like the plan at all, then the option you might have would be to recommend denial of the site plan. But if there's information that you're wanting to see changed or revised before you're comfortable with it, then Commissioner Baffa's recommendation would be the number 4, and that would be the one you would vote on.
But then he should add to that his recommendations for further revision.
Yeah, you'd want to give some specific guidance to the applicant, and you'd also want to postpone it to a specific date so that anyone in the public who's interested in following this could be aware of it.
Well, I think the plans are incomplete. You know, we don't have color. We don't have the south buffer. Those plants aren't identified. The location of the additional trees aren't located. The addition of the repositioning of the dumpsters is not addressed.
I don't know.
And the turning lane proposed corrections are not set in stone.
But we are assuming, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
We're assuming that staff would resolve those issues. But issues that have come up tonight from the public or neighbors would be additional issues that staff wouldn't have been working towards resolving. So those things we would need to include in your recommendation if you were desiring to move the dumpster or something like that.
Well, I think all of those things that I've mentioned are.
Yeah, but those are things that they already had taken into consideration and would have required in the process. But I guess what I'm saying is, are there additional things that haven't been suggested tonight as revisions by staff that you would want to see in that motion?
Well, the relocation of the dumpster, okay, a better plant list, including removal of hazardous plants. And I don't know that there was anything else other than what staff had recommended.
I think there was the issue of an employee something, park, or an employee structure or something.
Well, that would be the location of the dumpster.
There's the dumpsters here, there's an employee shelter here, and Mrs. Schaefer expressed concern about the location of that in relationship to the residential neighborhood.
Is there a buffer on the west side of that break room area, or is that just wide open?
It's just open green space. It is not, it's not part of any of the residential backyards. This space back here belongs to Smalley Plaza, but it's just grassy area. John, if you want to go to the aerial photo again, please.
Would there be enough
So
room to
it's
put a
this
buffer there too?
area right there. Well, they can't, there's not a requirement that commercial property buffer itself from other commercial property. It's an act, it's a fact that this, and I think it's something that's been missed all the way through this process, but what Mrs. Schaefer's referring to is that there was a 65-foot residential buffer all through this area, and even though this piece right here is part of these commercial lots, it's zoned residential, so it can't be used for commercial purposes. And so basically it's a green space buffer. But this piece right here, which was also zoned residential, has been rezoned to commercial. So this is just empty green space back here, but it's part of the Smalley Plaza property. So I don't see where buffering or screening that is accomplishing anything. What we're trying to address is protecting the residential properties to the south. And so you heard two things. One, two comments about relocating the trash dumpster. There was also a question or concern about the location of the employee shelter, which was at the back. You have to decide whether that's an item of concern for you as well.
I believe it is.
It's kind of an issue that hits close to home for me as far as with my properties. Cigarette butts tend to end up on the ground, and it becomes kind of a fire hazard. And I guess that's kind of the mindset that I had when it came up, but not to complicate the issue. Just
well, we're just maybe Mr. Canuck can shed some light on it. That is our interpretation of the plan. That is a shelter that's being put there for employee breaks. And since we do have a ordinance that prohibits smoking inside a building, many areas provide an outdoor area, but that is just an assumption on our part, and maybe Mr. Canuck can provide further detail about what that is for. But if that is an item for concern, the Planning Commission, then that's something that you need to articulate about if you don't think that's the right location for it.
Well, what is it? Is it just a picnic shelter, or is it a? When you first mentioned it, you mentioned a break room. I thought you said.
Well, we don't believe it's enclosed. We think it just has a roof over it.
So that's something we need to find out too.
John, if you can go to the site plan. I don't know if we have, or I'll tell you what, if the commissioners would flip through their packet, there's a version in your packet that shows what we are interpreting as this break area elevation. And it looks like it's a three-sided structure that has a roof and walls on three sides, but then one side open is how it appears to me. And
it's in our packet?
Yeah, it looks like this here. I don't know if you can.
This little like shed or lean-to looking thing? So it's like a shelter, like a picnic shelter sort of thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is.
There.
Okay.
So the open side is to the Ohio side.
Right. I don't know if I have that.
I'm actually interpreting the opening being towards the south, but I don't know that. So maybe the applicant can.
Are those just shutters to match the building?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Could you please come back up and answer this question for us?
Actually, I'm not real sure any more than what you are. I believe it's like, say, a shelter that's set up with looks like shutters on three sides, so it's got airflow all the way through it, just for break for employees.
It looks to me like it faces out to Ohio Street, the opening. Is that correct?
I would have to go back and look and ask them on that one. I can't tell you right off the top of my head on that one.
Thank you. Okay.
What does that say? What does that say?
It says break area. You
Oh,
can
I
barely
thought that-
read it, yeah.
okay.
It says break area. And I don't know what I don't really understand it. I mean, it's an attractive structure for what it is, but I don't understand the orientation of it or the...
Well, I don't think the location is that bad. And I think the dumpster could be moved to where that tree is. And I'm not sure what that area south of the break area is either. Is that landscape? Grass?
I'm not sure.
This
I
area
followed-
south, directly
Oh.
south of the break area.
It's the buffer area.
Labeled wrong.
Yeah, that appears to have the symbolization that they have for grass in other areas. So I'm presuming we're talking about turf grass there.
Isn't there something you have to get to a dumpster or something? I mean, you can't just put it anywhere you want it.
Right. I
Right.
mean, you have to
There has to
it
be
has
a
to be
dump truck.
accessible. So
Yeah.
So where it is now certainly would be accessible. The suggestion that the Ms. Schaefer made up top would also be a potentially equally accessible position or location.
But like where the tree is,
The tree, I can't confirm whether or not that would or would not be accessible because I'd have to make some measurements to see if we had all the dimensions. Maybe Glenn can speak to that.
But it would result in the loss of a parking stall.
right,
Where the tree is would make it difficult to get to with the truck.
right.
And to get through it with trucks in there, you could put it on the north end at the far corner, and it would be accessible, or it is accessible here. This location was probably likely picked because it's closer to the kitchen. So,
But couldn't the break area occupy the space of the tree and then the dumpster right next to that? Where the present break area is?
So move this to the north
Yes.
and then move the dumpster to
Right.
this location.
Exactly.
Potentially. Yeah, I mean, you're probably losing some parking spaces again, but if you're relocating the dumpster to a different spot, you're probably losing parking spaces anyway.
Well,
Still going to waft over.
And I don't even understand those parking places. I mean, if you have a drive-through and you're driving through this drive-through, who's going to park in those parking places?
I'm assuming
Employees.
that it's probably employees.
Because you can't back out.
Right.
Well, you have two driving aisles here. You actually have the drive-through, which is the different kind of pavement here. It's a different kind of thickness, and then you have another driving aisle, so that if there's cars in the driving aisle, you can still, or the drive-through, you can still have circulation around the building.
Well, I'm not pretending to be an engineer, an architect, or anything like that, so I can't speak on any of that. But I do know that within this assembly, there are people that feel like it is not protecting their use of property or their neighboring property. So, what's your thoughts?
I just have a lot of concerns about the traffic. And I mean, I feel like we're really trying to, well, I liked your analogy of putting a big foot in a smaller shoe or something like that. And I appreciate everybody being so accommodating, but that's what it seems like we're doing. We're just accommodating at various aspects to try to make it fit. I live near there, and I am at that intersection a lot, and it is just hard to imagine how all that's going to work, and it just seems like an accident waiting to happen. And then to think of having a sidewalk there, I don't know who would want to walk there, or, I mean, there'd be certain times, maybe during the day, but there'd be certain times it just seems like it'd be dangerous to use that. And then I do think Millwood will be used a lot more
As an exit.
as Manchester is now. Just to accommodate traffic. So I guess that's my biggest concern, that we're just trying to make this fit, and I'm not sure that it's a good fit.
But that comes back to the same thing that I was saying, that we've been already reprimanded for not wanting development to occur there.
Oh, and that's not it at all.
And
I
that is
definitely
not
would love
it
to
at
see
all.
development, and it's supposed to be a neighborhood center, and so definitely, I think there is development should occur there, but something. Oh, and another thing that hasn't been mentioned is the drive-through is pointing towards the neighbors, and I just got to believe that'll echo and be obnoxious. The the direction that the drive-through is pointing to the south.
So where we were at was Commissioner Baffa had suggested a motion to.
Well, I didn't suggest a motion, I suggested an idea.
It wasn't a motion
Postpone.
Yes, it was a motion to postpone it.
No,
Yes.
no, it was a suggestion.
Okay, a suggestion to postpone it based on the fact that it needed further revision and needed to include possible alterations and changes. Okay? You sound like you're more of the opinion to decline it completely.
I just think it needs work.
Yeah.
It needs revision.
Yeah.
So
And I'm
we all
willing to
agree
see,
with that.
I'm willing to see a revision
Right.
and
Well,
see
I
if
am
it can
too.
work.
I am too, because like I said, it would be nice if it could all work. That would be ideal for everyone involved. So that would mean postponement
Right.
with the revision that's already been suggested happening and occurring prior to the time that is actually postponed to. And then apparently we're still talking about the idea of moving some of these structures or things.
Well, I think they should be moved. And that's why we postpone it
To residential housing, yes.
to see the changes.
If it can fit.
Then I think that that would need to be in a motion.
I agree. So moved.
So moved. Yeah, but we still, I need you to
need
I need you to
specifics.
Okay.
speak that in a motion that includes those things, please. No, I'm not the one making the assumptions of what you're wanting.
I move that we postpone consideration of the application for there's a need for additional information before any action can be taken with regard to location of break area, dumpsters, types of plants, and all the items listed on page, the 9 items listed on page 19 and 20? Or is that just the 1 through 8 on 20? Which
We
were the,
actually include 1 through 4 on page 19 and
And 1 through
1 through 9 on page 19 and 20.
okay.
Before we have a second or a vote, staff would recommend that you consult with the applicant to establish a time in which you'd like to see this again. Make sure that the date which you're postponing it to works for them.
Okay, so that would be August 2nd would be our next meeting? First, and is there enough time, do you think?
Yeah, we'll have to ask the applicant that. So we'll do that. But before I do that, I want to ask any members of the public, is there anything else that you want to say? I saw you waving at me, but you're okay? So let's hear from the applicant once more, please. And can you address whether or not August 1st would be sufficient time for these revisions to occur before we see this again?
The 18th. I believe so. We will get that put together and work through it, okay?
Does staff think that that's possible?
Would the 15th be better?
If they've already got some of these revisions in the works, as they say, as they're working towards building permit plans, then it should be. What will probably take a little more time consumption would be the ideas for relocating the dumpster and the shelter, because on a site plan like this, everything touches, and when you start moving things around, then you might have to move some other things around. But we would defer the timeline to the applicant's preference. And if their preference is August 1st, then we will move heaven and earth to get that turned around to you to bring it back. But it's incumbent on them getting the revisions to us so we can adequately review them for
That's
you.
not very much time. but
I guess what I'm going to say is, as far as the site plans and that kind of stuff, I believe I can get most of that done by August 1st, but I do need to confer with the owner to make sure where they're at. And so I would target August 1st unless I notify and ask for a delay on that. Is that acceptable? Because we're going to target trying to get it by August 1st. I know that they were in a push to try to get this moving forward.
So what would happen is if you made a motion to postpone it to August 1st and for some reason there was a delay in getting those revisions, it would have to appear on your agenda, but then you would have to postpone it again to the 15th. But it would at least create the opportunity for it to be considered on the 1st.
So I'll say August 1st then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow, these motions get really long and involved.
As we understand, there's a motion on the floor to postpone consideration of the site plan because you believe there's a need for additional information before you take any action on the site plan, and that postponement would be to your August 1st meeting. And I don't believe we have a second for that I'm aware of.
But
I'll second
I think
it.
there were specific items.
Yes, those will be articulated in our communication to the applicant.
And
Thank
and in the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
So it has been moved and seconded. Commissioner Linkwitz. Any other discussion or questions or anything that we need to talk about? If not, all those in favor, vote aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Okay, bringing us to application. You didn't know we did all this, huh? We worry about how many trees there are in every little lot. So, application SUP 17-2 filed by Rose Mullen requesting a special use permit to allow an open-air market and flea market. This would be located at 1700 Beverly Drive.
Mr. Chairman, I have communication here from Rose Mullen, the applicant, who says that she wishes to withdraw her request for the permit this year, that they're rethinking their plans and they hope to resubmit a plan next spring for this, but they don't feel like they're ready for this year. And so my recommendation would be to see if anyone is here to either A, represent the application, or that wanted to make public comment on this application because it is a public hearing. But rather than giving you a staff report, the communication I have from Rose Mullen is that she wishes to withdraw this for 2017 and rethink their plans and resubmit next year.
Is the applicant here or a representative? Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to speak? No?
So I would just make a note in the minutes that the application has been withdrawn, and then we'll see if they want to resubmit next spring. It's a little late in the year to be starting flea markets and some of those things, so they didn't feel like they were organized enough for this year.
Well, we'll welcome seeing that later. Which brings...
Do we need a motion?
No.
No, I'm just reporting to you that it's been withdrawn, and so since we advertised the public hearing, we did want to see if anybody was here to speak to the matter, but it appears not, so then you could move on to your administrative items.
So that would bring us to application number Z06-12B, filed by Bosick Architects on behalf of Foley Equipment Company. They're requesting approval of an amended final site development plan for Foley Tractor and Sales Service Facility. This is located at 2225 North Ohio Street.
What I'm going to do, and you have this at your places, but I'm going to condense our lengthy staff report to a single sheet.
Yay.
And so what we would like to do here and we'll get the concurrence from representatives from Foley Equipment that we have correctly interpreted this. But what we have is a revised site plan and building plan. And what's over in the right-hand column is what has been submitted for your review and consideration today. And it's a slightly larger building footprint with a slightly narrower and longer building than what was proposed. The building has been lowered to a single story, and it's 26 feet in height instead of the 32 that you reviewed. And the elevations as it relates to Ohio Street are essentially unchanged. And after I review this, I'll have John show those elevations. But the Ohio Street elevation is precast concrete panels with some signage on the front as well. The primary changes are to the north and south elevations of the proposed building, where what was proposed as primarily precast concrete panels that replicated the Ohio Street elevation have been eliminated, and the proposal that you would have concrete wainscoting at the bottom, but primarily metal siding on the north and south elevations. The west elevation is essentially unchanged. It was concrete wainscoting and metal siding before, and that is being replicated on the revised plan. The other aspect of the plan that's changed slightly, the original plan that you saw had essentially the KDOT access road was open at the end, and they were going to have a connection to it, and then you would go through a paved area and make your way to the front of the building. Under this plan, there is a new north driveway, and that has been shifted slightly to the west, but there is a north driveway approach. The original plan had 50 spaces. The revised plan has 50 spaces, and the landscaping that was proposed initially in December is unchanged. There's a 15-foot buffer along Ohio Street and a 40-foot buffer along I-70. So, John, I'm going to ask you to locate the elevation drawings that relate to the plan, the July plan, and we'll put those up, and then we should have a blow-up of the proposed landscaping that we can show you in a little more detail. So what we're looking for, John, is elevations that relate to the current plan. So this is the view from the northeast, and as we articulated, this is pretty much unchanged from the original plan. And then this wrap around here and down this direction, this is concrete panel wainscoting here and metal siding above. So if you could give us the different perspectives, John. So this is the view looking towards the northwest. This is the south elevation here. It pretty much replicates the north elevation, where you've got concrete wainscoting below and metal siding above. And so those are the primary changes from an elevation standpoint from what you reviewed in December. And so we have reviewed those changes, and while they are a modification from the December plan, our review shows that they still meet the requirements of the North Ohio Overlay District, but they do present a modified appearance from what you saw in December. And so, John, if you could locate the blow up of the two landscaped areas. One of the things that we requested was just some additional detail of those areas so you could see how those are being proposed, and it might need to, yeah, you might need to blow that up a little bit, John, if you could. Or, John, that was the correct drawing. So what you see on the right-hand side represents the front of the building, and then this is the proposed landscaping along Ohio. And then this is the 40-foot buffer strip along I-70. And so this is a blow-up or enhancement of those areas. That was not fleshed out in as much detail at your December meeting. But as we review this, what we would request is that if you are able to reach the same conclusion you did in December, we've got essentially the same recommended conditions of approval on page 15 of your report, but we would recommend that if you approve this plan, that as part of your action, you authorize staff to issue a building permit under either approved Plan A, the December plan, or approved Plan B, the July 18th plan. That would leave the discretion with Foley Equipment as to which plan they wish to pursue based on availability of financing and potential financial incentives. And so as to the second item there about granting staff the authority to approve the final driveway location, that location is no longer in question. Its location is now fixed, and so it is shifted from to the west of this proposed location. We do have a drawing that shows that, John, and I don't know if you would be able to locate that or not, but I had led Foley Equipment down the path of what I thought was a relatively routine vacation of right-of-way and restricted access on the north of this site, and it was anything but routine, and so that has all been withdrawn, and we have the driveway location pinned down for the north driveway. And so it is difficult to see, but it's right at this location. This is the access road coming off of to the west from Ohio Street, with providing access to Kenworth to the north and to this site. And so this driveway right here was not shown on the December plan, but the plan is to provide access to this parking area through here, and then heavier equipment can also go down through this west end. So this one-page sheet that I have provided is our summary review of the changes, and we'd want to hear from Foley representatives and their architect to see if we have correctly captured that. But our recommendation would be to approve the revised plan and then to further authorize staff to issue a building permit under either the Plan A or Plan B, leaving that choice to Foley Equipment. So I'd be open to any questions that you have.
Are there questions for staff? Nope. So is the applicant here?
They are.
Or the architect or representative or whoever would like to go first? Okay, we'll hear from the architect. Your name and address, please.
My name is Dick DeHarling. I'm an architect with Bozich Architects. Address is 1155 Adams Street, Kansas City, Kansas.
Thank you. It's your moment.
I have really not much to add.
Have we correctly characterized the changes from the design point of view?
Basically, yes, sir.
So we're going to have a lower profile building and a slight difference in the elevations, but the Ohio elevation should look about the same as what was presented in December.
Basically, that's true. We've taken the second story off. We've eliminated a little bit of the precast on both the north and the south sides with the office area, but we're still within the 20%, I think, requirement for decorative materials or something like that. If you have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to try and address them.
No, it's still a great. I liked it in the beginning. I like it still, but wasn't there like out in front display area? And I might have missed that tonight or
was
something.
shown in that.
That
the
stays in
landscape
the front,
area.
but we lost the display area along I-70
No. There are areas there.
there too.
This is the plan. There's 4 pads, concrete pads along the I-70 for equipment to be displayed, and then there's a 20-foot wide pad here behind the 15-foot landscape.
Oh,
buffer.
sorry.
So we'll have display areas.
Yeah, and could you approach the mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I should have told you that.
Okay, where's your? There's 4 concrete pads for the display along the I-70 portion of the site, and then on the Ohio Street, there's a 20-foot wide concrete display pad behind the 15-foot landscape buffer that's required.
Excellent. Other questions for the architect? Thank you, sir.
Again, we've basically replicated the conditions of approval that we had from December, and we would simply, if there's a motion to approve the revised plan, then we would ask that the Planning Commission clarify that you are authorizing staff to issue a building permit under either Plan A or Plan B, and leaving that choice to Foley.
Thank you. We're done there. Yes, sir.
Louis Erickson, Foley Equipment. I remember, 1550 Southwest Street in Wichita, Kansas. I remember some time ago, I think it was December, where I approached you all and we discussed all these plans, and we had a big case of sticker shock when we saw the actual bill. So we had to cut. The builder said, hey, you can save $100,000 if we scrap these landscape plans. I said, we can't. So those are still in there. So everything on the outside of the building is still as you approved it in December, except for what Dean Andrews noted. It's just the inside of the building has changed. We've added some square footage, but we cut the height down to save money. So get it.
Thank you
within the
for
budget.
retaining the rest of the ambiance. It's going to be a great facility. So I think Mr. Andrew has
On
stated-
page 15 and 16, we're recommending approval of the revised site and building plan, subject to the conditions that we've articulated there on page 15 and 16, and then we further recommend that you, in your action, authorize staff to issue a building permit under either Plan A or Plan B. And there's no reason to take any action on the driveway because its location is now fixed.
So the suggestion is the motion would be for approval of the amended site plans, subject to the following conditions, right?
Correct. Those 9 conditions.
The 9 conditions, and then that staff would further recommend the action.
That you just clarify that you're authorizing, in your action, you're authorizing us to issue a permit under either Plan A or Plan B. If for some reason that Foley wants to go back to their original design, that we not preclude them from doing that.
So there's 3 components.
Well,
Approval
the motion would be to recommend approval of the revised plan, subject to those
With the
conditions.
conditions.
And then we're
With
just
A or B.
requesting that whoever makes that motion clarify that in your action today, you're authorizing us to issue a permit under either plan.
Is that you?
I'll do it, sure.
I thought you were doing it. That's
Okay.
why I was
I'll-
looking at
I'll
you.
motion that we approve the plan with the conditions provided, and also giving staff the authorization to approve Plan A or B.
Thank you. Yep.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded to approve this with the conditions as listed, as well as staff's authorization to choose between plans A or B. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Wow. Okay. Which brings us to application number PDD-08-2C, which is filed by Anderson Engineering on behalf of AT&T Retail.
If you're ready.
And they are requesting approval of a final site development plan for a retail store addressed at 2596 South 9th Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, if we can start with an aerial photo. We have a lot of graphics with the heavy packet, so
It's a very heavy packet.
Just by weight alone.
I'm going to figure out a way to recycle it into something.
yeah. Build a house or something, right?
Right. It's only printed on one side.
One thing we're not going to cover in detail is that this is part of a fairly elaborate planned development district and TIF district that was created for this development, and this is the final undeveloped piece of that district. So Dustin's going to focus not on the background, but on the particulars of this plan.
So this is actually the last piece of the 2008 project that was a TIF project that incorporated the Coles development and eventually Buffalo Wild Wings, Shoe Carnival, and there was an outlot where Longhorn Steakhouse developed what we call Tract 1, and today we're looking at Tract 2, which is the remaining piece. And so with that remaining piece, we have a property that's a little under 14,000 square feet in size, and the proposed building for an AT&T retail store is 2,520 square feet, and they're also proposing 6,804 square feet of paving area. We can go to the site plan now, John. That might be best at this point. Okay. Is there one that just has the...
That was the conceptual plan that related to the lot split.
There we go. So this is the lot that we're talking about, and what's being proposed is a east-west oriented building, and it's 36 feet wide by, I think it's 70 feet. Yep, 70 feet deep. And so the front door will actually be to the north because there's a row of 12 shared parking spaces that are on what we call Tract 1, the Longhorn property, that are shared between the future tenant of this Tract 2 site and Longhorn. So there'll be parking on the north side of the building as well as 6 spaces on the east side of the building and 2 more on the west. So most of the patrons will either park probably to the east or to the north, and the front door will be on the north side. There's a 12-foot driving aisle on the south side that is only wide enough for one-way traffic, and so as part of this application we would like to speak to or hear from the applicant about if that would be one way, and if so, which direction is the preference. It does allow for an opportunity for loading and unloading for supplies for the store that's going to be required. If we can go to the elevation drawings now, John. There we go. Zoom in just, there we go. So the face that we're looking at now here in this elevation is the front that's facing 9th Street. Oh, go back one more. So this is the basically what we call the front face. This is the face that would be seen from 9th Street, and then this is the north elevation that you'll be looking at as you park in those 12 parking stalls on the north side of the building. So this is where the main entrance is. And it looks like we have, are these color renditions? Okay.
The only difference is the letters will be white opposed to black.
Okay. So we do have some color renditions here. And the materials that we're dealing with are this kind of hashing that you're seeing is a natural stone that's being proposed. The horizontal lines are a horizontal metal fascia, a type of metal siding, and then you have an awning and glass. And then you also, on the other elevations, have an ephes. If we can go to the next slide, there we go. You have ephes here, and then ephes on the west side and ephes on the south side, in addition to the natural stone. And the colors, it looks like it's a brownish mocha, a walnut color, and then the natural stone is just a natural limestone appearance stone, and then the ephes is also a walnut color.
The ephes is actually a
Sir, I need you to approach the microphone, please, so that
the
we
ephes
can
is
hear.
it's called manor white. It's like a tan.
Okay.
That's what it looks like.
So those would be the colors and materials that we're dealing with on the exterior of the building. And the parking and retail parking requires one parking space for every 250 square feet of a retail area. We've got around 2,000 square feet of retail area, so we're looking at 8 required off-street parking spaces, and that's what's being provided for off-street parking on this particular site. The traffic impact would be very localized to Planet Avenue over here on the west side, and primary access would be probably from that Longhorn site. When the Coles development went in 2008, there was a traffic study that was pretty extensive that was done and concluded that the intersection did not warrant a new stoplight. There is a stoplight to the north at Mid-State Plaza that you can access to from a shared access easement up towards the Mid-State Plaza around the east end of Ashley's that you're probably familiar with. There is a concern that we do have about the site plan, if we go back to site plan. So the 12-foot driving aisle that's on the south side of the building, right here that's shown, is over an easement. And it's a drainage easement. There's like a culvert drainage area here. And so this area, because it is a drainage easement, would be subject to it being disturbed or removed or potentially damaged in the event that the access easement needs to be accessed for maintenance or repair. And so that's something that staff is leery of, just because we try to protect our drainage easements as much as possible. And then we also have a 4-foot sidewalk that's already been constructed along Planet, as this particular property doesn't have frontage on Planet. It has frontage on 9th, even though it's accessed off of Planet because of the flag-shaped nature of the lot that is known as Tract 1, where Longhorns is located. The property is located in a critical drainage area, which means that when a subdivision is platted or when the subdivision is developed, that there needs to be a drainage study done to make sure that we're not negatively impacting the surrounding area with stormwater runoff. And in 2008, there was a drainage study done for the entire development where Coles is today for that Lambert's Addition replat. And so there is a detention pond on the west side of Coles and Buffalo Wild Wings and Shoe Carnival that you may be aware of, and all the water from this particular property is to be directed to that drainage system as part of that system. The property does have a base flood elevation of 1240. The building's lowest floor that's being proposed is 1242.5. And so because it is in the floodplain, what we do is we require an elevation certificate. And what that means is once the foundation is poured and we have the floor in place, before we start vertical construction, we have a surveyor that's licensed with the state of Kansas go to the site and confirm that all points on the lowest floor grade of the building exceed the 1240. And so with us having a 2.5 foot surplus grade there, we're confident that would be sufficient. We just need to have an elevation certificate prior to vertical construction, and we'll have that as one of our conditions of approval that we recommend. Signage is based on your street frontage. Because we have Planet Avenue on the west, we have 9th Street on the east, they are allowed to have 4 square feet per lineal foot of both street frontages, building frontages there, which results in 288 square feet that they're allowed to have. Right now, they have 3 wall signs. And if we can go back to the elevation drawings, John, they have one on the, see, this is the south side. So they have a wall sign on the south. They have a wall sign on the north, and then they have one on the east as well. So the 3 wall signs together, according to the plans and scaling them, comes out to about 228 square feet. So that does fit within the 288 square foot limitation. What we don't see proposed is any ground signs. The plan development district for the whole Coles subdivision area here does allow for 1 detached ground sign not exceeding 48 square feet and 8 feet in height. I don't know that they're proposing one. I can tell you that there is a shared signage a pylon sign out there that has a space allocated for this particular property. And so we'd like to hear from the applicant on if there is a ground sign being proposed, or if the wall signs that they're proposing here on the elevation drawings, along with that allocation of signage on the pylon sign, is what will be sufficient for them. The landscape area for this particular property, if we can go back to the site plan, John, based on the lineal frontage of the lot and the lineal depth, this particular property is required to have 1,125 square feet. They're proposing 1,275 square feet, so they meet the landscaping area in terms of how much proposed green space they are required to have in the front, 25 feet. Where they're lacking is they are required to have 2 tree units based on that landscaping area, and currently they need to add at least 1.33 tree units because they are proposing 11 shrubs, which gives them what we would call 0.67 tree units, essentially. So what we're looking at is tree units being added, and all those tree units, in addition to the parking lot screening that they've proposed, would have to be in the variety of either shade trees or ornamental trees. There is a trash enclosure on the west side of the property that's being proposed, and the plans state that it will be a split face block. And so what we would do is we would want to confirm that the colors and the color scheme of that split face block, which is a type of masonry product, would conform and be similar to the construction materials and color of the principal structure. And that the appearance of the elevation that we're seeing shows that it is 6 feet in height, which meets the requirements. So with that said, staff would recommend that this particular final development plan be approved. We do have a number of conditions. There's actually 8 of them combined. I can go through them and comment on them if you'd like, or I could just take questions from you if that's what you would prefer.
I think questions are fine. Do you have questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please, your name and address.
My name is Mike Mellinger. Address is 1902 South 11th Avenue, Ozark, Missouri. I represent the ownership. We are a owner-operator of AT&T, but actually don't operate this location. We sold 400 stores last August, and this market was one of the areas that we sold. We're currently located just about a half a block away from this location in the 3-tenant building. But when we operated the store, we realized that we were missing a lot of opportunity. We've done this concept with a few different variations of look. We've done it about 65 times where we go from multi-tenant into freestanding. And what we found historically is that the stores are much better experience for the customer because there's more open space, there's less wait time. Although we have to have more employees, we treat it more like an AT&T company store would treat it. And as a result of that, we see greater sales, which obviously is good for everybody. Like I said, we built this same building numerous times. So we've kind of tweaked it and changed it to make it very attractive, yet give, different building materials. So each time we go into a community, we determine, do we build building A, building B, building C? And what we found is that this design, at least currently, is very appealing to the consumer. We've also designed it in a way that it's fairly narrow, so we can fit on lots like this where it's almost, there's not a lot of uses you can do on 14,000 feet. So this works pretty well. We're a fairly low impact user. This works well for us because of the 10 or 12 parking spaces to the north that go with this lot. To address a few of the questions, I'll just go through them as I remember. The trash enclosure will match. It's a split-face block that matches the drive-it color. And we use the split-face block in some of our designs, but we found that it's the best way to build a trash enclosure so that it doesn't just get banged up. Because if you do, whether you do drive-it or stucco, it tends to look not as pretty. So that will match. As far as the direction of the driveway, I'm going to have to ask our engineers because I don't know what's the best direction, but I do know it's one way. If they say it needs to go east, it can go east. If they say it needs to go west, it can go west. We wanted it for circulation. We didn't want people to come in off of the Darden lot and feel like they were trapped. If they, if there's no place to park, we don't want people having to back up. So this way they can make a circle around and park on the other side. We think that most of our customers will actually park on those 12 spaces. That's where we feel like, just from usability, people use the closest spot to the door. Let's see, the other questions that were raised. The landscaping, I don't have a problem increasing the amount of landscaping to meet the tree lines. Again, that's something that we just need to tell our architects and engineers to address. I don't really know what we need to do as far as being over your easement, but if we need to do a bond or something to protect, we're open to doing that.
It's more just to put you on notice that paving there is subject to being
Totally
disrupted.
understand. Yeah, we
it's
understand.
at your risk. So
Yeah, we understand. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are there questions?
You wanted to know about the sign, where they're going to
Yes, the
freestanding.
sign, as I understand it, we do have the ability to have a sign on the property, but I also understand that we have the rights to be on the shopping center pylon. Assuming we can get that worked out with the master developer, which I'm still waiting on. I have to get their final approval on this because it's a TIF and different things. I have to go through several different processes. Once we get this due tonight, hopefully, then I'll take this same plan to those other users and operators and owners and get their approval. If we can have our own sign, we would love to have a small monument sign, but we're not asking for that at this time. Our sign company will actually submit a full sign package to you guys where they'll detail everything out in great detail. And so that one I'm not sure of because I just don't know if we can work it out with them, we don't have to build the sign, that's great. We would rather not have that expense. But
Any questions? No? Thank you, sir.
thank you.
So the action that we have recommended there gives them the flexibility to have the ground sign. It's already spelled out pretty much in detail in the planned development district that they can have one sign. It can't be a pole sign. It can be a ground sign. And so that would be an option that's up to them. But we have the other 8 conditions there that we have articulated, and we think the plan is in order for your action today.
Okay. Commissioners? So there were 8 recommendations?
Yes. We have the staff recommendation to approve the final development plan for the retail store on track 2, subject to those 8 conditions that you see articulated on page 11 and 12.
Okay.
do think it's a very attractive building.
It is very attractive, but it's not orange, like the one across the street.
Orange, now they went to a blue color. AT&T getting rid of the orange.
The orange?
Confuse customers too much.
Well, I recommend approval of the proposed final development plan, subject to the 8 conditions that staff has listed.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the proposed final development plan for this AT&T retail store on track number 2, subject to the 8 conditions that staff has recommended. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor vote aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. And that brings us to discussion items. Our first discussion item being a preliminary discussion of a request from JRI Ventures that the Planning Commission consider whether indoor gun ranges should be added as a conditional use in the city's commercial zoning districts, and if so, in which districts and under what circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are adding a new category to your agenda, and so what we're finding is as we discuss issues that might result in a text amendment or for need for a text amendment, we want to expand our base of input and information so that we're not maybe setting up the parameters of a text amendment in a vacuum. So we have been contacted recently by the representative of the building. If you're familiar with it, it's a large building on 621 Westport Boulevard, and it used to be Kansas Cellular and Alltel, and before that it was Carousel Restaurant and a number of things. I don't know how many times Mr. Story has sold it, but probably too many to count. But it has been a number of things. It's a very large building with available space, and there was some thought about perhaps establishing an indoor shooting range. Well, at this time, indoor firing ranges are not provided for in the zoning ordinance, and as such, they're deemed to be prohibited within the city limits. We're being asked to conduct a comprehensive review of our commercial zoning districts to evaluate the addition of indoor shooting ranges as a conditional use. We've also found in our research that most communities do classify it as a conditional use, but they also generally allow shooting ranges in industrial zoning districts as well. And so we wanted to widen our base to include discussion of that as well. We've also found that most communities have adopted certain performance standards that indoor gun ranges must meet. And so our discussion points today, first of all, is should indoor shooting ranges be allowed within the city limits? We think it's a reasonable use to allow, and the conditional use process is the best process for that. As we look at our commercial districts, obviously things like our C1 office district might not be appropriate. Our C7 highway commercial may not be as appropriate, and because of all the shared walls and close proximity, the central business district may not be appropriate. But we'd like your thoughts on whether they should be allowed and in which commercial zoning districts. And then if they're allowed in industrial districts, should they be allowed under the same circumstances as they are in commercial districts? So one option would be to say that they're conditional in commercial but permitted in industrial. The other option is to say they're a conditional use, but they're conditional use in both commercial and industrial districts. And then the other thing that we would want to get input on from those interested in and knowledgeable in operating indoor firing ranges is we are suggesting here that if conditional use process is done, that there be some standards that are adopted, what we would call performance standards or whatever, for the indoor shooting range use, and that might give more comfort to commissioners reviewing plans for a shooting range. So we have those displayed here, and we would like to get some input on those about whether those are all reasonable from an operator's perspective. But question one for discussion and input is, it's a use that's not presently recognized within the city limits. Should we add that as a use permissible in the city limits? And if it's conditional, what commercial districts do you think it's reasonable to allow them in? And then as far as industrial districts, do you think it should be a permitted or conditional use in any circumstance? So with that, we'd like to get some input from you, but we also have some interested members of the public, and we'd want some gather input from them as well.
Okay, a point of clarification. The property that is been brought up as a suggestion, 621 Westport Boulevard, is zoned C7, highway commercial.
It's got a mixed zoning of C7 and C5.
And you had mentioned highway commercial as not being an appropriate location?
It may not be appropriate. What we would discussed with the applicant is that if the decision was that C5 was appropriate and some of our C7 locations were not, then instead of having the mixed zoning that we have on that property, it would probably be most appropriate if the entire property was zoned C5.
So
because we view C5 and C6 as the most logical commercial districts to allow indoor shooting ranges in. And it's certainly within your purview to say that you see C7 as, well, C7 is only located in clusters around our interstate interchanges. So we have C7 around 9th and I-70. We have C7 to a degree around Crawford and I-135 and around Schilling and I-135. Those are the primary concentrations. And the C7 district is designed to encourage and accommodate things like hotels, motels, restaurants, and travel plazas. And so you can decide whether you think those areas that I've identified would be appropriate, but we have identified C5 and C6 as the most logical commercial districts to add indoor shooting ranges as. But it's, the first question is, we don't presently allow it as a use in the city limits, and should it be allowed as a use?
So, commissioners, your thoughts? Honestly, I assumed it was. So,
We've actually never had. I did some research. It's not just the indoor and outdoor, but on the Parks and Wildlife site, there is no shooting range anywhere within Saline County.
Not in the county at all?
Not in Saline County or the city. They are allowed within Saline County, but there currently isn't one.
Really?
And we have never had a proposal within the city of Salina to have an indoor shooting range. But we've had some interest here of late, so we are bringing it to you for discussion.
It's typical of communities, isn't it? To have that?
Some communities lump it into indoor recreation generally, but most communities we have researched, and we've actually found quite a few communities that have only added it as a use in the last 3 or 4 years. And so we're finding lots of reports from communities that say this is a use that's not presently allowed in our community, but we have interest in establishing one.
So if there aren't any in Saline County or Salina, where do people get education and practice on appropriate use of firing arms?
That might be a question to ask some of those in our attendance today, because we can't answer that question.
I would think it would lend to the. I would think it would lend to the safety aspect of using firearms if we had facilities where because I've lived in communities and gone to them, and I just assumed they were all around. So anyway, the first question is, should it be allowed in the city limits? So I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, why aren't they allowed in the central business district? I've seen them in several communities. I think Wichita, for one, has a shooting range.
I think Mr. Andrew comment about common walls and shared walls probably, because there were probably some people who would not want a shooting range adjacent to their shop downtown, right? Or their office.
One of the things about the downtown area with all the shared common walls is that you could have property owner A imposing a burden on property owner B to properly reinforce or modify the shared common wall, because you have to have a wall that is designed to withstand the caliber of ammunition that's being used. And so it's usually easier when you have an open floor plan, an open building, where you can have an exterior wall that you can reinforce as opposed to a shared common wall. So there are some communities that I have seen that either prohibit or discourage shooting ranges to be located in multi-tenant buildings, because it's inherently more difficult to design a common wall between tenant spaces that is capable of containing the ammunition that's being used.
So that's really a part of question 2.
Right. There's
whether or not
nothing
should
that
be allowed in
says
C4.
We are just pointing out that there are some inherent challenges to locating an indoor shooting range in the downtown area. You may think that it's a perfect use for the downtown. We are just pointing out that you run into some challenges when you have a shared common wall between tenants.
I would think we would get around that by making it incumbent upon the shooting range itself to reinforce that wall rather than...
But when you have a lot of locations downtown where there's a wall that is mutually owned and shared by two different owners, and so it's going to take either the agreement or the dollar investment for both. It's not to say it can't happen. I'm just pointing out that it's inherently challenging to do a shooting range in a multi-tenant building that has shared walls.
Well, and I think honestly there are other issues, right, about downtown locations for things like that. I don't have a problem with it myself, but I can see people thinking it not appropriate use of
the flip side of that is
retail
when you
area.
make it a conditional use, it has to be approved on a case-by-case, location-by-location basis. So some locations may be appropriate and some not. And if you think C4 is appropriate, that's fine, but we're just pointing out the challenges.
And question number 3, industrial zoning then. I don't understand why it wouldn't be appropriate.
It's just that Mr. Berg's specific interest dealt with commercial zoning classifications, since the building out in Westport is not zoned industrial, but we think that we would be short-sighted if we only addressed shooting ranges in commercial districts, because we think that industrial districts are also suitable locations for a shooting range.
And so we can hear from some experts.
Yeah, I think we have.
Do we have experts?
If they claim to be experts or not, but they can tell you what their interest is and what we're trying to accomplish here.
Your name and address, please.
Nathaniel Berg. I'm with JRI Ventures. Their address is 621 Westport. I also live in Salina, though. I am not an expert on shooting ranges, unfortunately. I'll tell you a little bit about our company. What we do is we build, own, and operate Freddy's restaurants all across the country. We have a little over 2,000 employees right now. In Salina, we have about 20 employees who provide administrative services at 621 Westport. The building is enormous. We've had folks out, architects out, to look at it. The building is perfectly suited to be able to house a shooting range. In fact, we could build as many as 24 stalls, which is an incredible size shooting range. I don't believe the market would support that, but we have more than enough space. It is zoned C7 right now, and it's my understanding that the parking lot is C5. To me, what we have used the property for the past several years and what it has been used for several years prior to that doesn't really fit within the C7 zoning classification. I don't think it's been really used as your normal highway type property in decades. It's been some time. It's been an office space, Alltel's call center, for a long time. I am not an expert on shooting ranges, but we have gotten in touch with several folks who have kind of helped us walk through the process of what we would need to do to convert the building into a safe shooting range. The standards that the staff has put forward would be standards that we think are appropriate. I think it would be best that it would be on a conditional use because it's my understanding that the biggest concern is the sound. And if you have a significant size building, you can certainly contain the rounds that are going down range. It's the sound that's more concerning. And so it's what we were told is that's the concern and that's the issue that generally when cities are looking at this issue that has to be properly addressed because you don't want that sound to cause problems for your neighbors.
So what our thought or our approach would be is that we could initiate a text amendment to whatever commercial districts that you identify and add indoor shooting ranges as a conditional use and then have these as essentially performance standards for that use so that if the use is approved, it has to be a location that's capable of meeting all these performance standards. So what we wanted to do was to get those out and get some feedback as to whether those were reasonable and appropriate. And so a lot of these things are outside our purview, but it was kind of surprising to us to see things like the ventilation system and a lot of things like that. And there's concern from OSHA about sound buffering and things of that nature. So our main point of emphasis was to figure out which of the zoning districts we want to change to allow for it, but then also to get feedback on whether these performance standards are reasonable or whether we're way off base. In any event, anybody that operates a shooting range is going to be subject to these on a federal level, but we wanted to incorporate them into the text amendment because it might give people who are concerned about it to say you don't have to be concerned because for them to operate they have to conform with all these standards, and if they can't or unable to conform then they're not going to be able to operate. But we don't want to have operating standards that are not realistic. So you've looked at these and think that these are things that would apply in any event?
That is correct. Yes, also to get insurance. Yes. Yeah.
So the two approaches are you can decide that we can amend C7 to make it a conditional use and C4 to amend and make it a conditional use, and then you become the filter of those locations that are appropriate. We don't think it fits well in the office C1 district or the C2 neighborhood district, and then you can decide about C3. So C3, this afternoon we looked at a AT&T retail store in a C3 district. The Kohl's, the Buffalo Wild Wings, all those are zoned C3. If you think that's can be a suitable zone for an indoor shooting range, then we could do that as well.
The police training center is going to have a firing range.
There's talk about making some substantial modifications to the existing shooting range that's in the former animal shelter out on Old Highway 40. And I'm not for sure whether that's going to be both indoor and outdoor or outdoor only.
So it's out of the city and
it is inside the city limits, but we have shooting ranges that are accessory uses to law enforcement. What we don't have is identified permitted use as a privately owned and operated firing range.
It sounds like it could be a niche market, and it might bring people in from, I mean, it doesn't sound like there's that many nearby, and I'm okay with it being near shopping or central business areas. If it were in a standalone business or a standalone building. And those,
Which would be determined by conditional use.
Yes.
Or anyway, by
definitely.
us sitting here today. We
Right.
don't know about that in the future, but obviously that would be our.
Obviously, there's got to be a lot of, because we didn't include it in this, but there are some, we reviewed, and it's 18 pages in the federal criteria for indoor shooting ranges, but it's quite specific about having, the walls designed to withstand and you've got to monitor what type of and caliber of ammunition is being used, and there's ventilation requirements and lead removal requirements and a number of things that have to be met. But we think that these design standards and conditions that could be imposed through a conditional use permit would allow for the safe operation of firing ranges inside the city limits. I think we do have another interested members from the public that may wish to comment on this, both as to the zoning aspect and maybe as to whether these standards or conditions are reasonable things that any operator would need to comply with.
Are there others here that wish to speak? No? Okay. Is anyone back behind that wall in front of me?
No.
Ma'am? No?
So our thoughts were, if you tell us which commercial districts we think on the industrial side that I-2 and I-3 are appropriate locations for that, and you would just need to advise us as to whether you think that they should be conditional or permitted by right in an industrial zoning district. And then
I don't really, have a problem with them being anywhere, but I don't know. The C7, I guess I don't see why that's any different than in front of Kohl's and C3. I don't know. Is your suggestion that would somehow be a negative factor visually for someone traveling through or stopping by, or
I don't
is
believe
that the
so.
reason for?
It's just that the emphasis on and it's, as Mr. Berg pointed out, it's one of the oddities of that particular building. But one of the concerns that the reasons for creating the C7 district is that the C7 district actually has a fairly restrictive list of uses, because the previous planning commissions and city commissions said that our interstate locations are so valuable that we shouldn't waste them by having something locate there that doesn't serve the traveling public. And so the C7, there's only about a third as many uses allowed in C7 as allowed in C5. Even though it has a higher number, you'd think it was more intense. But if there's nothing, again, if you're using the conditional use process to filter locations, there's nothing inherently wrong with allowing it in the C7 district.
Other opinions?
I have no
So
problem.
then you'll proceed with
What we would do
formulating
is
a text amendment?
formulating a text amendment that would add indoor shooting ranges to the list of conditional uses in C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, I2, and I3, unless you tell us that you would like them to be permitted by right, which would mean if it's in an industrial district, it would not be reviewed by the Planning Commission, but it would just be a administrative review. So, you have any thoughts on treating industrial districts differently?
Again, I was like, why? Who cares about the industrial part, right? But there may be people that do. But my feeling would be that that would be a right, and that any commercial district would be a conditional use permit. But that's just my opinion.
I agree.
Seems reasonable to me.
That way people could choose, if they wanted to make the process easier, they could simply find a site as in a commercial or an industrial location.
So what we will do is draft a text amendment, share that with Mr. Berg and with you as commissioners. If you think we're on the right track, then we'll initiate that and advertise it for public hearing.
Thank you, sir. And that brings us to our final topic of discussion. Preliminary discussion of the sign limitations applicable to high schools located in the Public Use Educational Facilities Zoning District.
And we brought this to you primarily because it's been sitting on top of my desk and I've been staring at it for 6 weeks or 2 months, and we haven't really moved forward with it in any way. But you did in 2012 adopt a set of district sign regulations, and we got quite a bit of input from Ken Kennedy, who was then a member of the Planning Commission. And there was some discussion about treating high schools differently, having a different set of sign standards for that. And the only real exception that was made at the time was to have separate signage for athletic stadiums and public arenas, which would allow pole signs in a larger area. And Mr. Hers is more familiar with this than myself, but the concepts that are being looked at for the South High and Central campuses exceed our limitations, and Dustin's kind of put a summary in there, but the sign limitations wouldn't allow for many of the things that they're requesting, both as to the size and number of signs. So before we tried to move forward with any kind of text amendment, we wanted to get some feedback from the Planning Commission as to the approach that you think is most appropriate to take. And option one, I think, would be the hardest, because as I shared with the school district and their architect, that we could go in there and try to increase the size limits and increase the number. But as we do that, we're just as likely to be wrong as we are to be right, in terms of we increase the number of signs to 3 per campus and they want to have 5 or something along those lines. The other approach is in our commercial districts, as we discussed with the AT&T store today. In our commercial districts, we say, based on your building frontage on a street, you get X number of square feet of sign area, and we're not going to limit the number of signs, but your total sign area can not exceed this amount of square footage. That is one approach that can be taken. What we have seen in some communities is because college campuses, high school campuses, hospital campuses can be fairly unique, they allow for submittal of campus sign plans. So basically, instead of having a set of sign rules or regulations, they would come forward and say, this is our plan for all the signage we want to have at this campus, and it's reviewed at a public hearing by the Planning Commission, and it's kind of like having a PDD for signs. Instead of trying to go with a set of rules or limits, you would look at the plan and see if it fits the neighborhood and doesn't overwhelm the site, and you approve the plan as opposed to having a set of regulations. And then the fourth approach is to say, we think our sign code is really good and we don't want to change it. But if you think you need to do something more different, you can apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals for sign variances. We're not real big fans of sign variances because you're dealing with First Amendment issues and other things when you're dealing with signs that don't really fit with setbacks and lot coverage and things like that. But of those approaches, we wanted to get some feedback from you, and we'll get some feedback from Chris Upson and Charles Renz about the approach they think works best for them. But we wanted to get some feedback from you before we embarked on any kind of amendments, what approach you think might have the most appeal.
I think a lot of grade schools especially are undersigned.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
You know, so the approach, you know, maybe in the commercial districts is maybe not adequate for some of the schools, you know, especially if they're set back from the road quite a bit, that they maybe should be allowed larger letters or something, more square footage, whatever the case may be.
I think that any campus situation like that is a totally different situation, and it's self-contained. And a decision needs to be made about that in an overall picture, right? Just like the design of the property itself. I think it depends on the scale of the building, the scope of the property, the way that traffic enters and exits the property, and then the signage should be designed to complement the building as well as direct traffic. I mean, our new school buildings are beautiful, the new renovations that have taken place, and I would think that signage would be similar and represent the style and the overall design element of the space while getting people where they need to go.
Like, for instance, Belmont off Ohio, nice school, nicely remodeled. I have no idea what the name of that school is. There's no sign on Belmont, you know.
Yes, the front door, the address and the front entrance is on Roach, so their sign is over there. We have never heard any feedback from the school district or anybody that our rules are too restrictive as to the elementary or middle schools. It's primarily a high school phenomena because of the multiple facilities and the fact that their campuses are so large. Both high school campuses are in the neighborhood of 30 acres, which dwarfs anything that an elementary school has. But they're, again, the idea, and if you extended it to all schools and not just high schools, but the idea under option 2 is you would take the building frontage that South High has on Magnolia and the building frontage that they have on Edward, and you would add those together, and then that would become, to say, if it's 500 feet of building frontage, then you can have a total of 500 square feet of sign area at South High, and we're not going to tell you how to divide that up. That is an approach that we take with our commercial districts. We've always tried to differentiate our residential from our commercial, but high schools are kind of in that hybrid area that they're semi-commercial, just recognizing that our schools, most of them are in or near residential areas. So,
well, that would definitely make it easier for the person designing the signage, because they would have parameters to start with.
Correct.
But I still am leaning more towards like the number 3 approach, which forces them to think outside that box and come up with something that is a little more interesting visually too. But I totally understand what you're saying. They want. I know they want this because we've heard this here. That they want specific standards before they start to work on the creation of them. But
One
again, I
thing
think it's really
between
more of a
3
campus.
and 2 is that 2 gives them the parameters and they have some predictability, whereas 3, there's still some unpredictability because there's subjective.
That's the part I like.
involved. Right.
I like the unpredictability and the subjectivity because that's what I think got us the buildings that we have right now because they're really interesting visually. I hope that inside, there is great space. But the last time I went to South and Central, I drove around. I was late to my appointment at South because I couldn't figure out what street got me there, and I was on Edward or something. And anyway, I couldn't get there. And then South, I was on the wrong side of the building because I couldn't figure out where the entrance was to if it was a parking lot for people or students or visitors or but yeah, I think they could be better marked.
But if they needed something more than what the number 2 option offers, they can ask for a variance, right? They could come and
Right, even if that's not. But just to go over it with you, right now, if you're at South High School, for the entire campus, they can have 1 ground sign, and it can be up to 64 square feet in area. And if they so choose, they can convert it into an electronic changeable copy sign. But again, that's saying 1 sign for the campus and 64 square feet. Now, the reason we ended up there was that when we were having those discussions before, and Ken Kennedy was the director of facilities for USD 305, he thought that was reasonable. The other aspect of this, John, I think if you, it's in the same section 3, that you're allowed to have 2 wall signs per zoning lot. So at Stewart Elementary or Hughesner or any school like that, they can have 2 wall signs. So if they chose and they wanted to have a wall sign facing Belmont and 1 facing Roach, they could do that. They just haven't chosen to. But we're not getting any feedback on elementary schools or middle schools about signage. It's mostly about the larger facilities and the multiple facilities that make up a high school campus and the multiple entrances and the multiple parking lots and those types of things. So
the green space at those places is vast, so I don't understand why they'd be limited to just like 1 sign on their property.
1 ground sign for 30 acres?
Yeah,
That's
it
not reasonable.
doesn't even make sense to me. But
today, South High has 1 ground
Right.
sign. And
I've never seen it.
it's out along Magnolia, but it's
No,
been all
I'm sure it's
covered
on
up by the
Magnolia, but I would
construction
assume
trailers
that,
and
right.
all that.
But I've never ever seen it, so I don't think it has much presence. But
So you were wanting direction or?
Well, we're just giving you one approach is to go in there and adjust these things to say instead of 1 ground sign you can have 2, instead of 2 you can have 4, and adjust these square footages. Our concern with that is that we might do that and we come up with those and then they say, well, it still doesn't fit our plan. Number 2 provides the most flexibility. Number 3 requires public review or planning commission review. It's a little more context sensitive. So we could do 1 and make things less restrictive, but we still think we could miss and be wrong. Number 2 provides the most flexibility and says, here's how much sign area you get. You decide how you want to divide it up. And number 3 says, we'll let you propose what you want to do for your campus and subject it to a public review. As under options 1 and 2, they would be applying for sign permits like they do today, and the sign permits would be reviewed by staff and issued under number 3, it would be more like trying to do a planned development district or a campus plan for, but just for signage.
As the liaison to the zoning board, I'm going to say that he's right. We would rather not see sign variances because the couple that I've had to deal with, the issue really came down to why should they get it when they didn't get it, you know? And then we're back to other issues that we've been dealing with in signage. And it's sort of like, they made the effort to make the variance, they did their thing, they got it, but nobody else went through that process and got it also. So I think staying away from a variance is definitely
We
the
would
best
like to stay away
alternative.
from sign
Yeah.
variances.
Which is number 3.
And
Well, it's number 4 would be to say, we'll leave it the way it is, and if they want to do something different, they can apply
so
for a
if
variance.
you put too
That's-
strong a parameter on the whole
Right.
thing, then they're going to be requesting variances. I say make them come up with something creative.
Yeah. Number 2, a question about lineal foot of building frontage. That's the address and main door, I presume?
No, if you're on a corner lot, you get 2. So,
Okay.
for example, this afternoon when you looked at AT&T Retail, we took their 32 feet of frontage on Planet and their 32 feet of frontage on 9th Street, and they had 64 feet of total frontage, or 65, I think, because they were 32 and a half or something along those lines. And then in that district, you get 4 square feet per any. So that gave them 65 times 4 square feet. And so with our high schools, if you look at the amount of building frontage that Central High has on Crawford, Front, McAdams, and Roach, that's a lot of square footage. And so we're saying, because of the size of your site and your building, you can have this many square feet of sign area total. And if you want to have 16 signs, you can have 16 signs and divide it up that way. Now, some people don't like that approach because they think that allows too many signs. But it has worked reasonably well in our commercial context.
And what I might add, in with my conversations with the school district and the architects for both Salina South and Salina Central as they've been doing their renovation projects, is they would like to have signs for like gymnasium or home of the Mustangs or an auditorium or signs for Salina Stadium. And so when you start looking at all the different facilities, they're not just a simple education facility anymore. They've really got other areas that they try to incorporate onto their site and for the community. And so in their mind, they need not only more signage in terms of area, but in terms of the number of signs. And what they've tried to do with some of the new renovation projects is actually incorporate some of the what I would call logo imagery into their construction, meaning they may have a wall that has a giant Mustang logo, the red Mustang logo that you're familiar with. But because that is a logo that is tied to the identity of the school, it is a sign. It's not necessarily artwork. If it was a mural of a Mustang running wild, that would be artwork, but this is a very specific and intentional logo graphic that there becomes a sign. And well, when you do that, you're eating up a lot of sign area. But is it unnecessary? Is it untasteful? Probably not. There's really no reason not to allow it. It's just that our code currently doesn't.
Yeah, I think if number 2 gives them enough, then I'm good with that.
So am I.
Because probably what we'd look to is adding something to this section, and just, we've got for athletic stadiums and public arenas, we'd probably add something here for high school campuses and have something dealing with both the number of signs and that. And I don't think we'd have to change the height necessarily, and we're not proposing to allow high schools to have pylon signs or pole signs or things like that, just to give them more flexibility as to the area and number of signs. So if you are open to number 2, what we can do is take some test drives applying number 2 to South High and Central High and share those with you and what the results would be.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, I said the goal of these public discussion items is to alert potentially interested members of the public that an item is on for discussion, and if they so choose to come and provide input from sources other than just staff or from you, so that we don't design these approaches in a complete vacuum and that we don't get public input till we get to an advertised public hearing. So the more input we can get early on, the better it is when we do get to a text amendment public hearing. So
Precisely. Anything else?
I will remind Mr. Freiberger that he's on the Board of Zoning Appeals and that you have a meeting on Thursday. With our largest agenda that we've had in 4 years.
Probably.
And then we have no other items for August 1st, but we'll do our best to get the revisions from Popeyes, and that would be your lone agenda item. I do have 2 plats that have been filed. There's one that we haven't done in a long time. It's a county plat, but it's within a mile of the city limits, so we have jurisdiction over it. But Westar is wanting to build a rather large substation on the property that's directly south of Phillips Lighting, and so they're replatting that property to create a separate lot for the substation. And then there's some property west of downtown on Elm where an owner wants to replat those lots to repurpose them, and so those would be on the 15th, and we will set up a study session for you on philosophical discussion about planned commercial districts and site plan review for the 15th of August, and you got your share of site plan review today. So
yes.
What I would like to see is for us to do some planning. And if we could spend 10 minutes at those meetings where they're light, obviously wouldn't work today, but if we could talk about how zoning could be affect our carbon footprint, whether that be walkability, yes, transportation, definitely, whether that even be color of roofs. There are certainly many things that zoning or the Planning Commission could impact to reduce carbon emissions.
How do you suggest that that's presented in our meetings?
We could come up with different ways, different ideas, either from the Planning Commission or from staff.
you want that as a preliminary discussion item, such as the 2 items that we had today, or what context would you want to see that come up in?
Well, I think that it's such a big topic that, there is, some cities are mandating new subdivisions have wildlife corridors so that, the wildlife has a place to continue their migrations. And, that in itself is a major program where, and I don't see it until we really start developing outside of the city limits. But that it would be a big discussion. And so I think we should just bring up topics that we might be interested in and pursue them.
Can that be at a study session and
Sure.
Dan leads
Yeah.
it?
Well, but you would
bring
lead
out-
it and Joan and,
But
you know.
You could,
Yeah, yeah.
You could bring some of these ideas that you've already
Yeah,
read about,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah, yeah.
And I think we need to
discussion.
revisit some of the ideas that we have, or some of the things we've talked about, like the the 9th Street corridor, especially now that that hotel is being demolished and change is happening there. I'm not sure what happened with the discussions we had about changing 9th Street. So,
Well, and North Salina Community Development got $60,000 from Greater Salina Community Development, Stain Hansen. So there will be some improvements happening. So it'd be good to collaborate.
Primarily between the levee and Pacific, not so much in the
right,
area
and I'm
between
talking
the
from
levee
there
and-
on the extension on, right?
Right.
Which I think we need to take more of a role in. And we've talked
Along the
about it,
floodplain.
but I think there are things we need to revisit as well.
And,
yeah.
you know, tiny houses is a smaller carbon footprint.
We need to stay on top of that density issue of zoning and,
and
use of property.
And it's probably not a zoning issue, but incentives for infill. Incentives for, I think I brought up, I can't remember the name of it, greenhouse vegetable growing. I can't remember the.
High tunnel?
High tunnels, yes, high tunnels. Incentives for that, and then those are probably not zoning issues, but those may be planning issues. And so, you know, I think there's a million things that we could just talk about, and I thought if we could just devote 10 minutes at each meeting or have a study session, like you say. I know Joan is very interested in something like that.
Yeah, I was trying to think we wouldn't have to burden the staff to bring up the
Right.
topics if Dan's already got them right here.
Well,
Right.
Well, yeah, I
We
guess
can
we'll let
have
staff
that in a
reflect
study
on
session
that.
format. We just have to give some general advertisement or description of what is going to be covered there. But if we want to call it sustainability topics or something along that line, we can do it that way.
Anything else?
Well, we think we're pretty much out of fuel today.
I think so too. I think we're adjourned.
I think I missed my 7:30 meeting.
I think you did.